While I was back in Wenhuang County with my 2,000 soldiers, the battle at Tianyong City was getting desperate. Zhongli Mei wanted to rush out and fight, but Xiaoshan kept holding him back, telling him it wasn't his time yet. The situation was bad. Ingbu came in and reported that the northern barbarians had split 10,000 troops to attack the west and east gates. 3 gates were under siege now. Only the south gate was still safe. Zhongli Mei suggested sending a rider to ask me for help. He knew I had 2,000 men, but Xiaoshan shut him down immediately. She had already made peace with dying in that city. She understood the math. Nearly 40,000 enemies against maybe 10,000 defenders at best, counting my forces. It was a death trap. She didn't want to drag me into it. She thought about my wives, about the peaceful life I'd built for the common people in my territory. If something happened to me, all of that would collapse. She refused to put that burden on me. But deep inside, she wanted me to come. She wanted me to ride in like some kind of hero and pull her onto my horse. She just couldn't admit it, not with her soldiers dying all around her. She sent Zhongli Mei out with 200 light cavalry to bring in grain supplies and find the imperial reinforcements. She told him to tell General Kai Zifeng that if reinforcements didn't arrive within a day, the entire garrison would be wiped out. As for me, she said I owed them nothing. If I came, it would be a kindness. If I didn't, nobody could blame me. Zhongli Mei left angry. He'd already decided to ask me for help on his own, no matter what she said. Xiaoshan told Ingbu they just had to hold until dawn. She ordered the reserves and cavalry untouched. She wanted to keep some of the Fengling army alive no matter what. She even told Ingbu that if she died and the city fell, they should bring the survivors to me. She said I would be a good general for them. Then she put on her mask, the mask of Nangong Qiushui, the commander the barbarians feared. She stepped onto the highest point of the wall, cut down an arrow mid-flight with her sword, and rallied every soldier on those walls. Even the wounded stood back up when they saw her. She picked up her heavy war bow, spotted an enemy commander behind the attacking troops, and put an iron arrow right between his eyes. Back at my camp, Wang Dinglu came storming in, furious. I'd sent him and Chun Laochou to the Imperial Reinforcement Army to tell them about the situation at Tianyong City. But those bastards wouldn't even let them see the commander, claiming he was resting. They got thrown out of the camp entirely. Everyone in my tent was angry. Zhai Shanchuan was cursing. The 2 Linghu brothers were staring at me, desperate for a plan. Their little sister was up on those walls fighting for her life. Even the supply officer Ning Changhe looked helpless. I opened my eyes calmly. None of this surprised me. I'd already figured out what was going on. The reinforcement commander was the son of the imperial grand tutor, and his sister was the emperor's favorite consort. A man like that had his own calculations. If the barbarians took Tianyong City, they'd be weakened from the fight. Then he could swoop in, retake the city, crush the remaining enemy, and claim all the glory for himself. He was willing to let the Fengling army die for his career. I told everyone to stop panicking and get ready to move. The battle had been going on for half a day already. The city was probably locked in a grinding fight by now. When I gave the order, my officers rushed out like madmen. Within half an hour, 2,000 soldiers were armed and ready. These were Longju's elite troops, not some ragtag militia. I'd already sent Lu Lang back to Siwa village to bring everything I had: tower shields, weapons, tank war chariots, catapults. I was pulling out all my reserves for this fight. I figured I'd just consider it a wedding gift for Xiaoshan. Shortly after we left Wenhuang County, we ran into Zhongli Mei with his 200 cavalry. He was coming to find me. When he saw my army already on the march, he was overjoyed. When I told him about the reinforcements refusing to move, his rage nearly boiled over. He wanted to charge into their camp and kill their commander on the spot. I stopped him. If I didn't go myself, what good would it do if you went? He understood immediately. I told him his 200 riders now belonged to me. I had a use for them. He didn't hesitate. He turned his horse around and fell in behind me. Meanwhile, back at Tianyong City, Xiaoshan was still fighting on the walls. Every kill she made, the soldiers called it out, and each shout pumped strength back into the defenders. She was right there with them, bleeding alongside them. But then came a terrible sound. The outer gate had been smashed open. Hundreds of barbarians had hacked through it with axes and blades. The gate split into pieces. The city had double gates, and the inner one was stronger. The design forced the attackers into a narrow corridor where defenders could drop rocks and shoot arrows from above. But the barbarians were pushing with everything they had, slamming against that inner gate while the defenders pushed back from the other side with logs and crossbars. It was pure brute force against brute force. Xiaoshan ordered fire oil poured down from the walls. Fire oil burned long and could block the enemy from breaking through, but it was rare, and there was a risk. It could set their own gate on fire too, which would actually speed up the breach. But there was no other choice. Her father, General Linghu Zheng, understood the situation. He lined up his men in a curved formation behind the gate, ready for whatever came through. He told them plainly, if they held, the city stood. If they broke, every brother who died on the walls above would have died for nothing. The fire oil worked. When it ignited inside the gate tunnel, the barbarians packed in there screamed and burned. Anyone who rushed and died, and anyone who made it back out was a walking torch. It was brutal, but it bought time. Xiaoshan ordered her archers to pick off the retreating enemies and focus on the cavalry. She could see the barbarian horsemen gathering in the distance, each one carrying a black cloth to blindfold their horses. They were planning to charge straight through the fire. Horses fear flames, so the first wave might fail, but they had enough men for a second and third attempt. If even one charge broke through, the defenders on the walls would be trapped. Then everything started falling apart at once. The west wall was in trouble. The east wall was in trouble. Ingbu was wounded and couldn't fight anymore. The barbarians had quietly moved their elite black armor troops to the east and west while Xiaoshan was focused on the north gate. She hadn't noticed until it was too late. Then came the worst news. The east gate had been breached. Barbarians were already inside the city, climbing the wall stairs to slaughter the defenders from behind. Xiaoshan couldn't understand how. The east gate was built the same as the north gate, which had held this whole time. Then it hit her, spies. I had told her through her brothers to release the captured spies earlier. She'd done it without understanding why, trusting me. Now those spies had opened the east gate from inside. She was furious. She thought I had betrayed her. She cursed my name in her heart, wondering why I would do this, wondering if I even cared about the tens of thousands of lives in the city. But then the south gate swung open. Zhongli Mei rode in first, and behind him came my cavalry, flying the banner of the Howling Tiger Army. She saw me among the riders. I was here. Once inside, I sized up the situation instantly. The east gate was the priority. It was already breached. I sent Ning Changhe with 500 men to reinforce the east wall. The gate was gone, but the wall itself had to hold. Then I sent Zhai Shanchuan with another 500 to the north gate to support old General Linghu Zheng. Both officers moved out immediately. I told Zhongli Mei to go round up his own cavalry, over 1,000 experienced riders who'd been sitting idle this entire battle. He understood right away. When I told him to bring them to the east gate, he knew something big was coming, and he galloped off to the barracks. Then I turned to Lu Lang and pointed at the chaos around the east gate. I told him the next part was on him. He howled with excitement, raised his big blade, and charged toward the east gate with 300 of my best riders. I kept 500 cavalry with me. We were heading outside the east gate to set up a pocket formation, a trap. The barbarians had broken in through the east, and now I was going to make them pay for it. The east gate had only been open a short time, and the defenders inside had already killed a good number of barbarians who'd rushed in. The garrison troops were brave. They were just outnumbered and exhausted. Lu Lang hit them like a storm. His cavalry charged in, slashing and trampling, and the barbarians got a taste of what real elite soldiers could do. But I didn't let him stay engaged too long. That's not how my riders fight. We strike fast, pull back, then strike again, the same way these tribesmen hunt animals on the plains. It works even better against people. After Lu Lang's charge drove the barbarians back out through the gate, I called him off and ordered the shield wall up. Chen Bai, that rough bastard had actually improved a lot, shouted the commands. The tower shield soldiers raised their shields and pushed forward in a steady line, forming a giant net around the gate entrance. It was a half-circle of shields with spearmen and bamboo whip fighters hiding behind them. The barbarians outside had no idea what was waiting. They kept pouring through the gate, and what they found was a wall of death. Nowhere to go forward, and behind them more of their own men pushing in. They were packed so tight they couldn't even swing their weapons. My spearmen stabbed through gaps in the shields. The bamboo whip fighters lashed out and tore flesh from bone. The barbarians died in heaps, and the ones behind them kept coming because they couldn't see what was happening up front. My shield line was thin, though, not enough men to hold forever, especially if their cavalry got through. So I brought out the next piece, the tank war chariots. They rolled into position and sealed the gaps in the shield formation, completing the pocket. Then came the real trick. On Wang Dinglu's command, the chariots split open a corridor. The barbarians saw a way out and charged through without thinking anything to escape the killing zone. But on the other side, Lu Lang's riders were waiting, howling like wild animals. The barbarians ran straight into a slaughter. After a few hundred got through, Wang Dinglu closed the gap again, trapping the next batch back inside the pocket. Open, kill, close, repeat. I told Wang Dinglu the gate was his to manage. One rule, don't let the formation break. When Zhongli Mei arrived with his cavalry, the cycle got even faster. Every group of barbarians they let through was surrounded and wiped out within minutes. This was the plan I'd made back in Wenhuang County. The barbarians had better horses and more riders than us, so I wasn't going to fight them in the open. I pulled them inside the city where their cavalry advantage meant nothing. Street fighting, tight spaces, shield walls. Their horses were useless here. Once the walls were mostly cleared of enemies, I had my men haul the catapults up onto the east wall. The timing was perfect. The barbarian army had just finished regrouping outside the east gate, thousands of them packed together, getting ready for another push. I adjusted the angle myself and gave the order. The first stones flew in beautiful arcs and crashed right into the middle of that mass of soldiers. The impact was devastating. Each boulder was heavy enough on its own, but with the speed it built up in the air, anything it touched, man or horse, was crushed to pieces. Some stones bounced and rolled after landing, knocking down entire rows of cavalry. Horses panicked and bolted in every direction. These barbarians had never seen anything like catapults before. They'd already taken heavy losses from the crossbow batteries at the north gate, and now giant rocks were raining down on them at the east. North gate was a tiger, east gate was a wolf. No matter which way they turned, it was death. The pocket trap was working beautifully. The barbarians outside couldn't see what was happening inside the formation. They just saw an open gate and charged in, thinking they'd have an easy fight. Instead, the bamboo whips slowed them down and blocked their view, and then my soldiers cut them apart with blades. By the time they realized what was happening, they'd already lost thousands. Chen Bai and Wang Dinglu had it under control. Their job was just keeping the formation solid, while Lu Lang and Zhongli Mei handled the killing inside. At one point, Chen Bai started joking around, comparing the shape of my formation to something inappropriate. Wang Dinglu smacked him for it. The short guy actually had to jump to reach him. He reminded Chen Bai that I had rules about respecting women, and that kind of talk would get him punished under military law. Chen Bai shut up fast. I watched the two of them from the wall and shook my head. We were in the middle of a battle, and these idiots were clowning around. But I understood Chen Bai. He used to be an Imperial Guard instructor, carried himself with pride. Then he got over 100 of his brothers killed in the forest outside Lianshui County. That night broke him completely. Since then, following Wang Dinglu as his deputy, he'd become a different person. Not worse, reborn. Then the North Gate situation caught my attention. The fire oil had burned out, and the barbarians hit it hard. They broke through. This time it was mostly cavalry and archers pouring in, their best horsemen, armored up with leather on the horses' heads and chests, carrying lances and curved swords. Old General Ling Huzheng threw his family's elite death warriors into the fight. These were heavily armored men in full iron plate, iron masks, carrying halberds, long swords, and hidden short blades in their boots. Hundreds of years of the Linghu family's wealth and training went into each one. They formed up with long spears and held the line against the first cavalry charge. But cavalry is cavalry. After that first impact, the horsemen punched a gap through the defense, and more riders poured in to widen it. The infantry couldn't hold much longer. I made the call. I shouted for Lu Lang. He looked up from the east gate where he was still fighting, and I just pointed toward the north gate. He understood instantly, whistled for his riders, and 300 wolf cavalry thundered toward the north. I hated sending them. Those were my personally trained riders, and they'd take casualties fighting heavy cavalry head-on. But there was no other choice. Infantry can't beat massed cavalry. That's been true throughout history. I needed riders to fight riders, and Lu Lang's men were the most savage fighters I had. Xiaoshan had just mounted her horse to join the North Gate fight when she saw Lu Lang's cavalry slam into the barbarians. She watched them with wide eyes. Lu Lang took heads off with single swings, killing 2 men before he even cleared the first horse. His men fought like demons crawling out of hell. She noticed the key detail, their heavy chopping swords. The Fengling army used lightsabers designed for speed on horseback. My wolves carried thick, heavy blades that didn't need much strength behind them. The weight alone did the killing. It was a massive upgrade in cavalry combat power. She was thinking that if I ever built 30,000 riders like these, no nation in the world could stand against them. Zhai Shanchuan linked up with Lu Lang at the North Gate, and those 2 lunatics fought side by side, tearing through the barbarian cavalry. With their help, the North Gate defense barely stabilized, though the losses on both sides were terrible. Back at the East Gate, the barbarian commander finally realized something was wrong. He'd sent thousands of infantry through that gate, but nobody reported back. No updates, no signals, they just vanished. He blew the retreat horn. Chun Bai saw the barbarians pulling back and seized the moment. He shouted the order to close the net. The tower shields locked into a circle, the tank chariots squeezed in, and every barbarian still trapped inside the pocket was crushed together with no escape. Zhongli Mei saw the East Gate was handled, got word about the North Gate crisis, and charged off with his cavalry to reinforce. Even with Lu Lang's wolves there, the North was only barely holding. The garrison troops were badly hurt. The Fengling army had heavy casualties, but the barbarians were bleeding just as bad. Once the barbarians pulled back from the East Gate, I ordered the gate repaired immediately. After it closed, we wiped out every enemy soldier still trapped inside. Then I took everyone and headed straight for the North Gate, where the heavy cavalry fighting was still raging. But the barbarians were losing steam. In just half a day of fighting, they'd lost over 10,000 men across all fronts. Their commander was dead, their camp was destroyed, and their morale was crumbling. Soon enough, the retreat horn sounded at the North Gate too. The city erupted in cheers. Soldiers shouted, civilians poured out of hiding, and for a moment everyone celebrated. But then the reality set in. The streets were covered in bodies. The walls were soaked in blood. Brothers who'd been laughing and drinking together just days ago were gone forever. The barbarians didn't fully withdraw until nightfall. Xiaoshan stayed on the walls in full armor, waiting for the casualty reports. The numbers were brutal. 1,300 garrison troops killed or wounded, 2,500 Fengling army casualties. 3 of her 4 deputy commanders were down. Ingbu was badly hurt. Longju's old injuries had gotten worse, and Zhongli Mei had collapsed from exhaustion. Only Jibu was still standing, but the barbarians had it worse. Their infantry was nearly wiped out. They lost over 8,000 cavalry. Their fighting strength was cut by more than half. They'd retreated 20 miles to set up a new camp. Xiaoshan was smart enough to know we couldn't chase them. They still had around 10,000 capable soldiers, including over 2,000 heavy-armored vanguard riders. We were in no shape to attack. She asked where I was. Ingbu had already reported back to her about my pocket formation, how it was designed, how it worked, how we'd killed over 4,000 infantry with a tiny force. Lu Lang's 300 wolves had taken down 1,000 enemy cavalry. She was impressed, even if she didn't want to admit it. I walked into her command tent stretching and yawning, casual as ever. Everyone in that tent stood up and gave me the highest military salute. Xiaoshan took a deep breath, bowed deeply, and thanked me. She said without me the city would have fallen, the army would be dead, and she'd be dead with them. She promised to write everything into her report to the emperor and request rewards for me and my men. I sat down and laughed. You've said that line a few times already. If you really want to thank me, let's just get married and have a baby. The whole tent went silent. Everyone stared at me like I'd lost my mind. The battle had just ended. There were still bodies piled in the streets. The barbarians hadn't even fully retreated. And here I was talking about weddings and children. Xiaoshan coughed and said marriage could wait. If the barbarians attacked during our wedding ceremony, that would be awkward. She was flustered. All the serious, heartfelt words she'd prepared were completely ruined by my joke. I shrugged and said if there was nothing else, I'd head out. I turned to leave without any hesitation. That got her attention. She called out for me to stop, then sent everyone else away. Once we were alone, she started removing her armor piece by piece. Helmet, mask, everything, setting it all down neatly. I watched with raised eyebrows, wondering what she was doing. She walked up close to me and spoke quietly. She said she knew she owed me more thanks than words could express, but her position as commander limited what she could say openly, so she would give me what she could give. She told me she'd made her decision. Tonight, she would give herself to me. From now on, she would be my woman and only mine. I couldn't believe it. Xiaoshan, the woman who was always so proper and reserved, was leaning against my chest, wrapping her arms around my waist. I could feel her heartbeat through her skin. I'd imagined something like this before, but not this soon, and definitely not in a military tent right after a battle. She told me to come back to her family's manor. Not here in the tent. I understood what was happening. This battle should have been the end of the Fengling army. I changed that when I showed up. But Xiaoshan knew what was coming next. Once the barbarians were dealt with, she'd have to return to the capital to receive her rewards. But the court was full of people who wanted to destroy her family and disband the Fengling army. She might face accusations and political attacks. She might not be able to come back and marry me properly. So she wanted us to be husband and wife now, even without the ceremony, just in case she never got another chance. We changed out of our armor, slipped out of camp under the cover of night, and walked through the ruined city hand in hand. The streets were littered with bodies and broken weapons, but Xiaoshan walked like a girl without a care in the world. It was the first time I'd ever seen her like that. Light, free, happy. I kept that image of her in my heart. At the Linghu family manor, her room was spotless. The maids kept it perfect even when she was away, with her favorite incense always burning. It smelled soft and warm. Before anything happened, she asked me a question that clearly had been eating at her. Did I come to save her, or did I come for the military glory? I told her the truth. I came because she was there. Without her, I wouldn't have cared if the city fell. She asked what would happen if she went back to the capital and things went wrong. I told her that no matter what happened, no matter how far away she was, I would come for her. That was all she needed to hear. Every wall she'd built around herself came down. She whispered in my ear that she wanted an unforgettable night. I said yes, picked her up gently, and laid her on the bed. It was unforgettable, all right. For both of us. We were truly husband and wife now. When the sky started getting light, I dragged myself out of her room with a splitting headache. Between days of planning the battle, a full night of fighting, and then no sleep at all, my body was completely spent. Xiaoshan wasn't doing much better. She'd actually passed out near the end, and only woke up when the old housekeeper knocked on the door at dawn. If he hadn't come, we'd both have been caught sleeping in. That would have been embarrassing. She tried to walk, but her legs were unsteady. I grinned and offered to carry her. The old housekeeper obviously knew what happened. Xiaoshan's face turned red all the way down her neck. She punched me hard in the back, then kissed me on the cheek before I could react. A punch and then a sweet reward. That was her style. We chased each other around the courtyard for a bit like children, then went our separate ways back to our camps. It felt ridiculous. We were basically married, just missing the ceremony, but we were sneaking around like we were doing something wrong. Back at my camp, everyone was still resting except Lu Lang, who'd curled up with his horse in a pile of straw. I went into my tent, cleaned up, and collapsed. I slept so hard my snoring echoed through the entire camp. I didn't wake up until noon. I was woken up around noon by noise outside my tent. The Linghu brothers rushed in and told me the imperial reinforcements had finally arrived. Great timing, after the hardest battle was already won. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was their commander, Pang Shouyang, was in the Fengling army camp right now causing trouble. He wanted to chase down the retreating barbarians. I snapped wide awake. This was exactly what I expected. The son of the Grand Tutor, brother of the Emperor's favorite consort, a spoiled noble who'd never seen a real battlefield. He'd deliberately stalled his march while the city was under siege, waiting to see if we'd survive. The moment his scouts told him the barbarians had retreated, he rushed here to grab the glory. Now he wanted to lead his 3,000 cavalry out of the city to hunt down the remaining barbarian forces. It sounded brave. It was actually suicide. The barbarians had pulled back 50 miles. By the time his troops reached them, they'd be exhausted while the enemy would be rested and waiting. 3,000 riders charging into open ground against barbarian cavalry. That's not a battle, that's a slaughter. Xiaoshan and all 4 of her deputy commanders were trying to talk him out of it. They explained the terrain, the distances, the enemy's cavalry advantage in open field combat. He didn't listen to a single word. He kept puffing up about being the emperor's appointed general and the imperial consort's brother. The Linghu brothers assumed I was going to help Xiaoshan stop him. I turned around and grinned at them. Stop him? No. I'm going in there to support him. Encourage him. Cheer him on. They stared at me like I'd gone crazy. Think about it, I said. The poor guy marched all this way just to grab some credit. Now the big battle's over, and there's nothing left for him. You think he's going to accept that? We should be considerate. The brothers didn't understand, but by now they'd learned not to question me. Every time I did something that seemed unreasonable, it worked out perfectly in the end. They shut up and followed me. I threw on my casual clothes, didn't even button them all the way, and rode over to the Fengling army camp. I walked into the command tent like I owned the place. Hey, everyone's here. Lively in here today. Pang Shouyang spun around and glared at me. He had no idea who I was. Some guy in plain clothes strolling into a military command tent with zero respect. It made his blood boil immediately. Who are you? This is the Fengling army's command tent. Who let you in here? Pang Shouyang took one look at me in my casual clothes and ordered his guards to drag me out and beat me with 200 strikes for trespassing in a military tent. Xiaoshan stepped in and explained who I was, commander of the Howling Tiger Army, the man who turned the tide at Tianyong City. That changed his attitude, but not in a good way. His scouts had already told him what I did in the battle. He realized that without me, the city would have fallen, and then he could have been the one to retake it and claim all the glory. I'd stolen his spotlight. He was furious, but I didn't give him time to stay angry. I bowed respectfully and started pouring honey all over him. So this is the legendary General Pang. What a commanding presence. You look like a reborn war emperor. No wonder the people of Tianyong are celebrating. Their savior has arrived. Everyone in the tent went completely silent. They all stared at me like I'd lost my mind. This was nothing like the way I normally talked. But the Linghu brothers understood. Linghu Chongshan whispered to his brother, "Watch and learn. This is the legendary technique, killing with flattery, and it worked perfectly." Pang Shouyang ate up every word. I told him the emperor clearly trusted him deeply by giving him this mission. I told him this was a test, and if he brought back military achievements, no one at court could challenge his rise to power. I painted a beautiful picture of his glorious future. Then I pivoted. I said I fully supported his plan to chase the barbarians. I put on a performance, nearly crying about how the barbarians had tormented us common folk, begging him to bring us justice. Pang Shouyang was overjoyed. He grabbed my hands and called me his kindred spirit. He promised to share the credit with me. Then he puffed out his chest, called everyone else ignorant fools, and marched out to assemble his troops for the attack. After he left, all eyes turned to me. Some people were laughing, some were confused, some looked worried. Xiaoshan asked me quietly if I understood how many soldiers would die because of what I just did. She'd figured out my plan. I was using Pang Shouyang as a weapon. Let him throw himself at the barbarians. I told her the truth. If we stopped him today, the court would just send another incompetent general tomorrow, or worse, punish us for disobeying. The political interference would never end, and the barbarian threat would drag on, costing even more lives in the long run. Better to let this fool charge out now, get himself killed, and remove the problem at the root. It was ugly math, but Xiaoshan nodded. She understood. Sometimes being a real general means making the choices that no one wants to make. I told everyone to follow me up to the city wall. We were going to watch the show from a distance. Pang Shouyang moved fast. He assembled his troops and charged out of the city in less time than it takes to finish a cup of tea. But his formation was a complete mess. The cavalry galloped ahead while the infantry fell miles behind. No coordination, no discipline, just a mob rushing forward. When his cavalry reached the barbarian camp, the enemy was already waiting. Their horsemen hit Pang Shouyang's riders with one charge and scattered them. His infantry and archers were still 2 or 3 miles back, completely useless. The barbarian cavalry surrounded his scattered forces from both sides and tore them apart. Pang Shouyang panicked and blew the retreat horn. His soldiers ran for their lives back toward Tianyong City, but a disorganized retreat is the worst thing you can do against cavalry. The barbarians chased them for miles, cutting them down the whole way. They only stopped 10 miles from the city walls. By sunset, Pang Shouyang stumbled back through the gates. His armor was gone, he had an arrow in his shoulder, and he looked like a beggar. If his family's personal bodyguards hadn't fought to the death protecting him, he wouldn't have made it back at all. I watched the whole thing from the wall. The barbarians killed about 3,000 of his men in the fighting, but when the final count came in, he'd lost over 6,000. The rest had simply run away and disappeared. In 2 hours, his 10,000-man army was finished. Still, his arrival wasn't completely worthless. He'd brought a large supply of grain, which solved the Fengling army's food shortage. Xiaoshan expected the barbarians to attack the city again with their remaining forces, but the next morning, scouts reported they'd packed up and retreated during the night. The whole barbarian army pulled out of Yuzhou entirely and even gave up large parts of Yanzhou, retreating all the way to the border region. Pang Shouyang caught a fever on top of his wounds and collapsed. Xiaoshan sent him back to the capital with his bodyguards. A few days later, once everything was confirmed safe, Xiaoshan prepared to lead the Fengling army back to the capital. We said our goodbyes. There was sadness in parting, but we both knew it had to happen. I left before her and headed home to Siwa village. My men had been fighting for a long time, and everyone was eager to get back to the quiet life. When we reached the village entrance, the whole place exploded with excitement. Drums, cheers, crowds of villagers lining the road. To these people, I was the hero who'd removed the blade hanging over their heads. No more barbarian raids. No more living in fear. They could finally live in peace. Standing at the front of the welcoming crowd were my wives. Mu Wanqing, the head wife, couldn't wait. The moment I dismounted, she rushed into my arms crying. She'd spent every day terrified that something would happen to me on the battlefield. She couldn't even focus on the account books. Then Mu Wanqing's sister arrived. She'd been out delivering grain to a family, and threw herself around my neck like an octopus, tears streaming down. Wu Xiangyue stood back, eyes full of longing but holding herself together. She'd been the one keeping the family and the village's defenses running while I was gone, always on edge, and she couldn't quite let go of that tension yet. I laughed and told them all to go home. We'd talk there, and once we got home, I didn't come out for 2 full days. For wives, all starved for attention, none willing to be left out. It's a good thing I'm a strong man, because keeping up with all of them was a battle in itself. On the 3rd day after getting home, I finally gathered all my key people and laid out my plans for developing the county. I wanted to build a shopping street along the river, convert another area into residential housing close to the workshops, and get the farmland at Shango village ready for spring planting. The ferry dock at Zenhidu was behind schedule because of the cold weather, but I stressed that it was our top priority. Without a working port, we'd have no trade income. After handing out assignments, I turned to Zhang Taichu, my blacksmith. He told me about half the iron ore had been smelted so far. Good. That meant we had enough raw iron to start the next phase of my plan. Real steel. I told him I wanted to build him a proper large compound, with his apprentices living on site and guards posted around it. He caught on quick. Whatever I was planning, it was serious and needed to be kept secret. At the smithy, I picked through the leftover materials from the smelting process. I grabbed a chunk of pig iron, smashed it into pieces, then found one of Zhang Tiechu's knife blanks, wrought iron, and broke that up too. I mixed the two together and threw them back into the furnace. Zhang Taichu was confused. He could easily tell pig iron from wrought iron. Any blacksmith could. But mixing them together and resmelting? He'd never done that. He didn't understand what it would produce. I didn't explain everything yet. The key was in how I chose which pieces of pig iron and wrought iron to combine. I hadn't taught him those selection standards, so he couldn't replicate it on his own just from watching. Once the mixed metal melted and fused, I stirred it with an iron rod to make sure it blended completely. We poured it into molds and got 2 ingots, enough for 2 curved swords. I pulled out a design I'd drawn beforehand. Zhang Taichu studied it and said it looked somewhat like a barbarian saber, but different. I designed it with a straighter front section and only a slight curve toward the tip. It was my own creation. Zhang Taichu started hammering the ingot into shape. He was incredibly skilled. Within a short time, he had a perfect, even strip of metal. But when he started to bend it into the curved shape, I stopped him. Not yet. Heat it again. cut it in half, stack the halves, and hammer them together. This was the real technique, repeated folding and forging. Each cycle drove out impurities and made the steel stronger and more uniform. Our ancient furnaces couldn't reach temperatures high enough to burn out all the impurities in one go, so we had to beat them out through brute force and repetition. After the first fold, I told him to do it again. And again. By the fourth cycle, Zhang Taichu was drenched in sweat and running low on energy. He'd never folded steel more than this in his life. Each round required more precision. The hammer strikes had to be perfectly controlled in force and placement, with each blow landing slightly offset from the last. One mistake, and the whole piece was ruined. He looked at me nervously. I pointed to the second ingot sitting behind us. There's a backup. Keep going. He gulped down some water, steadied himself, and went back to work. After another half hour of careful hammering, we had 20 layers of folded steel. The metal was transformed, nothing like the raw iron we'd started with. But I wasn't done yet. I had more ideas for this blade. The steel billet came out nearly perfect, just one tiny crack, but overall I was satisfied. I told Zhang Taichu to start shaping it. He switched to a smaller hammer and carefully stretched and formed the metal until a curved sword started taking shape. Then he grabbed a bucket of water to quench it, and I nearly had a heart attack. Stop. Not water. Oil. This kind of refined steel would shatter if you quenched it in cold water, especially in winter. It had to be oil. The cooling was slower and more even. Ideally, I'd use industrial machine oil, but that doesn't exist yet, so cooking oil would have to do. It was still 1,000 times better than water. Zhang Taichu looked at me like I was insane. He'd never heard of oil quenching. Then I reminded him about that barrel of oil I'd given him to keep at the smithy. His face turned red as a monkey's backside. He thought it was cooking oil for his wife, and she'd already taken half of it home. I kicked him and told him to go get whatever was left. He ran and came back with most of the barrel. We quenched the blade several times until the process was complete. Then I let the apprentices handle the grip and decorations while we went home to eat. When I came back, Zhang Taichu was doing the final polishing. He worked through 3 grinding stones, coarse to fine, testing the edge with his thumb after each pass. As the surface cleared up, beautiful layered patterns appeared across the blade, wave after wave of lines in the steel. This was essentially a Damascus steel sword, made through the repeated folding and forging process. Zhang Taichu was trembling with excitement. The blade gleamed in the sunlight so brightly you couldn't look directly at the edge. I told him to grab an ordinary sword so we could test it. He picked up a captured bandit's blade and stood in front of me, gripping it with both hands. Go ahead. Swing. The 2 blades clashed in a shower of sparks. The old sword snapped clean in half. The broken tip went flying. My curved blade didn't have a single scratch on it, not even a nick. Zhang Taichu collapsed at my feet, literally grabbing my pants leg and sobbing. He kept saying he'd forged a legendary weapon, a blade that cuts through iron like mud. For a blacksmith, creating something like this even once was enough to be remembered forever. I helped him up and told him to calm down. From now on, you make as many of these as we have iron for. Everyone in the village gets one. Axes for chopping wood, kitchen knives for cooking. Everything gets made to this standard. His jaw dropped. He couldn't believe I wanted mass production of what he considered a priceless treasure. I told him the forging process had to stay completely secret. Tonight he should rest and memorize every step. Tomorrow he'd forge the second ingot into a straight military saber and use the leftover steel to make me a spearhead. After that, he'd stop working until I built him a new, larger smithy with hand-picked apprentices and proper security. He swore he wouldn't tell a soul, not even his wife. I told him to make a scabbard for the curved sword overnight, and I'd come pick it up tomorrow. The reason I made the curved sword wasn't random. I'd been thinking about it since the battle against the barbarians. My wolf cavalry under Lu Lang were incredible fighters, but I couldn't keep relying on them for everything. They lost 7 men in the last battle, and the cause was simple. Their horses gave out before they did. The horses we had from the stable were nowhere near as good as barbarian war horses. Once we finished breeding the new horses, Lu Lang's wolves would get them first. These wild tribesmen were perfect candidates for heavy shock cavalry, what I imagined as iron-armored riders on armored horses, carrying heavy blades and long spears, designed to smash through any battle line. But I also needed a separate force of light cavalry built for speed and hit-and-run tactics. For them, The curved sword was ideal. On horseback, a curved blade flows through a cut much more smoothly than a straight saber. Less effort, more killing power. And if I ever managed to build firearms down the road, those light riders could become dragoons. At that point, any barbarian invasion would just be a technology gap massacre. The first curved sword was mine, though. I watched every step of its creation. The straight saber Zhang Taichu would forge next, that one I planned to sell. Feeding over 1,000 soldiers and their horses was bleeding me dry. I needed income. I was heading toward the horse ranch when Wang Dinglu ran up and told me the salt and iron commissioner had arrived at the mine. I frowned. This official, Zhou Wanggui, had come once before while I was away fighting. Now that the barbarians were beaten, he'd shown up again. Perfect timing. Wang Dinglu said the man was at the mine throwing a fit because I wasn't there. I rode over quickly. The mine had grown. Rows of thatched huts and wooden shelters surrounded the dig site, housing the convict laborers from Tianyong City and villagers working the operation. Zhou Wanggui was standing there in his official robes, smacking the accountant over the head with a ledger book. When he saw me, he turned his anger my way. He demanded to know where I'd been. He threatened to charge me with neglect of duty and dereliction. Salt and iron commissioners held real power. They controlled vital resources and always had powerful backers in the capital. Most local officials were terrified of them. I smiled and said, "I'm not afraid." His eyes went wide. Nobody talked to him like that. He demanded to know what could possibly be more important than the mine. I just stood there with my hands behind my back and smiled at him, saying nothing. He scoffed. "What? Did you fight off the barbarians or something?" The accountant cleared his throat nervously and answered for me. He explained that I was not just the supervisor of the mine, but also the commander of the Howling Tiger Army, and that I'd personally led 1,000 soldiers to turn the tide at Tianyong City, killing over 6,000 enemy troops with a fraction of the manpower. The smirk on Zhou Wanggui's face froze solid. Turns out my father-in-law had carved a stone monument at the east gate of Tianyong City, recording my achievements in the battle. Smart move. I figured his next step would be to stir up public support, so I'd be forced to expand the Howling Tiger Army into a proper regional defense force. The emperor had been stripping the Linghu family's military power, but building a militia backed by real combat results and popular demand. That was harder to argue against, especially with the barbarians still lurking near the border. When the Salt and Iron Commissioner Zhou Wanggui heard about my war record, his whole attitude flipped. He was a career bureaucrat. He knew better than to pick a fight with someone who commanded troops and had just slaughtered thousands of enemy soldiers on his own turf. He immediately turned his anger on the poor accountant instead, kicking the man into the snow and yelling at him for not helping me with my duties. I stepped in smoothly. I told the accountant to explain himself properly, and added that Commissioner Zhou was clearly a reasonable, high-minded official who wouldn't hold a grudge over something trivial. That put Zhou in a box. If he kept bullying the accountant after I'd praised his generosity, he'd look petty. Zhou swallowed his frustration and played along. The accountant explained the real problem. The mines or veins were irregular and thin. The tunnels had expanded, but output was dropping. The convict laborers sent from Tianyong City were malnourished, poorly dressed, and suffering frostbite from going between the hot tunnels and the freezing cold outside. Zhou immediately pointed at some of the workers who looked strong and well-fed and called the accountant a liar. The accountant panicked and blurted out the truth. Those healthy workers weren't the convict laborers. They were my people from Siwa village. My villagers ate well, dressed warmly, and even had meat occasionally. That's why they looked so different from the starving prisoners. Zhou turned to me with wide eyes. I called over one of the villagers from Shango village and asked him when he last ate meat. The man said it was 2 days ago. I'd given out wild boar as a reward after the battle. He'd received half a pound and just finished it. Zhou couldn't believe what he was hearing. He grabbed another villager and asked the same question. That one said his family still had several big fat fish hanging at home. Zhou rubbed his eyes like he thought he was hallucinating. He'd inspected mines all across Yuzhou and never seen common people this healthy. These villagers were practically living as well as he did, and he was a government official who ate meat at every meal. He kept staring at them, trying to figure out how a remote border village had achieved what the rest of the province couldn't even dream of. The villager told Zhou Wanggui that I'd taught them to freeze fish and hang them up for winter storage. Joe nearly lost his mind. He was from the south, grew up eating fish, and hadn't tasted fresh fish in ages. Not up here in the frozen north where rivers were covered in thick ice. I could see the craving written all over his face. That gave me exactly what I needed. This man controlled salt and iron distribution across the region. I couldn't bully him too hard, or he'd find ways to get back at me behind my back. Better to win him over with kindness. I started describing a dish, white fish simmered in aged yellow rice wine. I told him it was a lost recipe from a previous dynasty's imperial kitchen, passed down through my family. I made it sound so good I could practically see his mouth watering. He wanted to ask for a taste, but couldn't bring himself to lower his dignity. So I made it easy for him. I casually mentioned that I'd already told my wives to prepare this exact dish today, and if he wasn't too busy, he was welcome to stop by my humble home for a meal. He jumped at it immediately. Not busy at all. I'd be honored. I rode home fast and sent someone to the water camp to grab the biggest, finest white fish we had. Then I taught my wives how to cook the dish. By the time Wang Dinglu brought Zhou over after his mine inspection, everything was ready. I kept the meals simple on purpose, 4 dishes, 1 soup, and my homemade wine. Just the fish, some wild vegetables, and mushrooms. If I'd brought out the real food my family ate daily, pork knuckle, wild chicken stewed with mushrooms, this official would have had a heart attack. My wives were over at the horse ranch right now eating exactly that. Zhou took 1 bite of the fish, and his whole body shuddered. The flavor hit him like nothing he'd ever tasted. Fresh fish, no fishy smell at all, the rice wine bringing out a clean sweetness. He went into full glutton mode and devoured half the fish before remembering his manners. He awkwardly asked why I wasn't having my family eat with us. I told him not to worry, they had their own. I barely touched the food myself. It was just rough grain rice, and I was used to much better at home. Zhou noticed and felt moved. He thought I was offering him the best I had, scraping together a humble feast from my meager supplies. He figured those villagers who bragged about eating meat were probably exaggerating. Typical country folk calling a tiny scrap of pork half a pound. He had no idea how wrong he was. After he finished eating and patted his round belly, his whole attitude had changed completely. He told me not to worry about the mine. He'd let the clerks handle it. He acknowledged that my real job was protecting the people as a military commander. As he was leaving, I called him back and gave him 3 live fish in clay jars, still flopping around. My wives had gotten tired of eating fish weeks ago, and these had been sitting around so long I was glad to be rid of them. But to Zhou, it was a treasure, a perfect little favor that cost me nothing. Zhou Wangui's hands were shaking when I gave him those live fish. In winter, fresh fish like these could sell for 30 silver taels each in Yuzhou City. He couldn't wrap his head around how I had them. The trick was simple. My house had a heated brick bed that kept the room warm enough to stop the water in the jars from freezing. I told him it was nothing special and invited him to come eat fish again anytime. He nodded deeply, letting me know he'd remember the favor. Perfect. 1 well-placed meal and a few fish had just bought me a valuable ally in the salt and iron bureaucracy. After he left, I rushed to the horse ranch where my wives had saved me a proper meal, pork knuckle, and all the good stuff. I'd refused to serve our real food to Zhou because I didn't want him knowing how well we actually lived. Let him think those villagers were exaggerating about their meat. Let him think the fish was my finest treasure. Better that way. That evening, I walked the horse ranch. It had doubled in size since we built it. Over 500 military horses and nearly 200 captured barbarian horses. Tian Laoba had been crossbreeding the best barbarian stallions with our Mares, and about 80 were already pregnant. The foals wouldn't be battle-ready for at least 3 years, but it was a necessary investment. The next morning, Lu Lang showed up at my gate with a huge crowd of his tribespeople. Every single one was carrying a small bamboo basket filled with gifts. Their translator explained it was a tribal holy day. They offered their most precious things to their god. And apparently, I was their god now. The baskets were full of random stuff. Bone carvings, fur trinkets, bits of food. I accepted everything. If I refused, they'd think their god was displeased. Then I spotted something that made me freeze. In one basket sat a small dried red fruit, about the size of a pigeon egg. I picked it up, bit into it, and my eyes went wide. Chili pepper. Wild chili pepper. This shouldn't exist here. In my previous life's history, chili peppers arrived from the south very late and took over 100 years to spread across the country. Finding wild ones growing in these northern mountains made me question again whether this ancient world was really the same history I knew. The uses were endless. As a spice, sure, but more importantly, dried and ground into powder, chili could be loaded into crossbow bolts and launched at enemy formations. It would be far more effective than lime powder. Get that stuff in someone's eyes, and they're done. The tribesmen told me through the translator that a whole cliff face near their old mountain settlement was covered in these plants. They'd been using chili to preserve meat for generations and had brought large quantities when they migrated here. Even better, they already knew how to cultivate it. I told them I wanted as much as they could get. When they heard their god liked this particular fruit, dozens of them dropped their baskets and sprinted off to fetch more. I was already planning ahead. Come spring, I'd have Lulang's people clear mountain plots and start large-scale chili farming. The stuff grew well on rough terrain, so it wouldn't compete with our rice and sweet potato fields in the valley. 1 year of growing and stockpiling chili peppers, and I'd have a strategic resource nobody else in this world even knew about yet. The tribespeople came back, carrying huge baskets overflowing with dried chili peppers. Now that I was providing them with plenty of food, they didn't need as much chili for preserving meat anymore, so they had tons of it stockpiled. I popped one in my mouth and my face turned bright red. These wild chilies were more intense than anything I'd ever eaten in my previous life. Just one made my tongue feel like it was on fire. But that also meant they'd be devastating as a weapon and perfect for helping villagers fight the cold and dampness in their bodies. I started adding chili to everyone's meals. Nobody could handle it at first, so I wrote down a dozen recipes for my wife Mu Wanqing to learn and spread through the village. My wives had all become excellent cooks by now, good enough to run a restaurant. Wu Xianyue actually suggested exactly that, so I marked out a prime spot on the planned commercial street for a restaurant, right alongside my father-in-law's medical clinic. Construction kicked into high gear. I built a second brick kiln at Shango village to double our output. The whole settlement was growing fast. Shango and Siwa village had basically merged together. The tribal territory was fenced off with wooden palisades and marked with stone boundary markers so they'd feel secure about their land. Along the river, I'd laid out foundations for an entire commercial district. It didn't look like much yet, but the total area of Zenhidu was already 3 times the size of Wenhuang County. Fully developed, it could rival Yuzhou City itself, maybe even the capital. Time passed. The water fort was nearly finished. I was waiting at home for the Linghu brothers to return from Tianyong City with news about the barbarians' movements and their sister. They came back at noon, riding hard, faces grim. "General, something's happened. Third sister has been placed under house arrest by the emperor." I shot upright. I'd expected trouble. That's why Xiaoshan had been so desperate to spend that night with me before she left. But house arrest? I never imagined that. They explained that shortly after she returned to the capital and reported her victory, the emperor suddenly flew into a rage. He said if not for her battlefield achievements, he would have had her executed. Her war record barely saved her life. The emperor called it merits canceling out offenses. They didn't know what specific offense he was angry about. Xiaoshan's own letter to her brothers said nothing about the reason, just told them not to worry. Then Linghu Chongshan pulled out a separate letter addressed to me. I opened it. 3 words. "Don't come save me." I slammed the letter on the table so hard the whole thing shattered into pieces. The brothers jumped back in shock. They'd never seen me lose my temper before. I was furious for 2 reasons. First, she was trying to protect me by telling me to stay away. But what kind of man lets his woman be treated like this? Second, this woman had spent years fighting on the frontier, bleeding for this empire. The Fengling army had suffered devastating losses defending Tianyong City, and this worthless emperor repaid her by wiping away all her achievements with 1 sentence, locking her up and threatening to take her head. If he actually hurt her, I would make him regret it. His precious empire wasn't as big as he thought. Push me far enough, and I'd show him exactly how fragile it really was. I threw Xiaoshan's letter into the fire. "Don't come save me." She doesn't get to make that decision. I'd pretend I never read it. I asked what old General Linghu Zhang was doing about the situation. The brothers laughed nervously. Their father had already started reassembling his private soldiers and gathering his scattered death warriors across the city. If their mother hadn't physically stopped him, he'd have marched on the capital already. They handed me an official document from the old general. As I predicted, The citizens of Tianyong City had petitioned to expand the Howling Tiger Army for border defense. The document authorized me to recruit up to 3,000 soldiers. I almost laughed. The old man had finally seen the emperor's true face and decided to go all in. Officially authorizing a 3,000-man army was no small thing. If word reached the capital, the court officials would immediately accuse him of plotting rebellion. He clearly didn't care anymore. Recruiting 3,000 men wouldn't be hard. Most of Pang Shouyang's scattered soldiers were now wandering the countryside with nowhere to go. By imperial law, deserters had 5 days to register at the nearest military camp or face execution. Most of them couldn't make it to Tianyong City in time. Their only option was banditry. I'd already cleared out every bandit gang in the region, so new gangs would form to fill the vacuum, and these deserters would join them. All I had to do was sweep through those new gangs, offer the men a place in the Howling Tiger Army, and their status would flip from criminal back to soldier. They'd jump at the chance. Being a bandit sounds romantic, but it's mostly starving and hiding. The brothers asked about their sister. I told them to relax and pass a message to their father. Xiaoshan was under house arrest, not sentenced to death. If the emperor truly wanted her dead, her body would already be on its way home. The fact that she was alive meant the political situation was more complicated than it looked. The Linghu family had deep roots in the military. The emperor couldn't just execute their daughter without consequences. I'd find a way to rescue her. They both exhaled with relief. Then I asked about the barbarians. Good news. Most of their army had pulled back to the northern steppes. Spring was their farming and herding season, so only about 2,000 troops remained on the Yinzhou border. Even better, there were rumors of internal conflict among the barbarian tribes. Their great Khan, a man called Kekatuli from the Wulianga tribe, had reportedly gone missing. The brothers figured the barbarians would seek peace negotiations. But there was troubling news too. Intelligence from the capital reported that an elite force of over 1,000 heavy armored soldiers had departed the capital heading toward Tianyong City. The Xuanwu Guard, the emperor's personal army. That changed everything. The Xuanwu Guard had been formed when the emperor was still just a prince, built in secret, and expanded after he took the throne. These soldiers were fanatically loyal. They'd helped him seize power during the succession crisis. If the Fengling army was a tool to weaken the Linghu family, the Xuanwu Guard was the emperor's real weapon, his fangs. Sending them to Tianyong City right after arresting Xiaoshan made the emperor's intentions obvious. He wanted to intimidate and suppress the Linghu family on their home ground. The brothers described the force, 10,000 men total, all heavy infantry. No cavalry, no archers. Shields, long swords, and halberds. And reportedly, they'd adopted war chariot tactics learned from the southern kingdom of Yu. I frowned at that. I'd been in this world for a while now, but still knew so little about the bigger picture. Digging through my inherited memories, I vaguely recalled that the Yu kingdom bordered the empire to the south. Before the barbarian invasion, the empire had been at war with Yu. They'd even sent 3,000 Xuanwu guards to fight there. But even that elite force couldn't defeat Yu's war chariots. I was still mentally mapping out the geopolitics. Yu kingdom to the south, barbarians to the north. Now I understood why the emperor had reluctantly sent Xiaoshan back to defend Tianyong City. His Xuanwu guard was tied down fighting Yu's war chariots. He had no choice. Letting Xiaoshan return only strengthened the Linghu family's reputation, which was the last thing he wanted. The brothers listed the surrounding nations: Nanping, Yu, Hoshu, Nanhan, Nantang, Hozhou, plus the tiny Jingnan squeezed between several of them, and Buliao far to the east near the sea. Among all of these, Yu was currently the most powerful. After the brothers left, I was pacing in the courtyard when someone knocked at my gate. It was Zhou Wenyuan, the clerk from the mine, basically the accountant who tracked daily output and shipments. He came in with a dozen convict laborers, each carrying a big basket on their backs. He said they'd struck a rich new vein today, finished their quota early, and brought me some waste rock for my construction projects. I looked at the baskets. The top layer was crushed stone, but underneath, high-quality iron ore. A lot of it. Are you trying to get me killed? I asked coldly. He dropped to his knees immediately, swearing he meant no harm. He said he was repaying me for speaking up for him in front of the salt commissioner. I didn't buy the selfless gratitude story. As the record keeper, skimming was easy for him. So I cut straight to it and asked what he really wanted. He came clean. The convict laborers were starving. The supply system had broken down during the barbarian siege and never recovered. Many were sick from the weather, freezing outside, hot inside the tunnels. He was begging me to give them food and let them see a doctor on credit until government funds arrived. Both requests were for the laborers, not for himself. That was interesting. I agreed to provide food, nothing fancy, but enough to fill their bellies. For the medical care, I said I'd discuss it with my father-in-law. After he left, I called in Lin Xiaoxi and Wang Dinglu to find out more about this Zhou Wenyuan. What they told me was surprising. During the barbarian siege, when supply lines were cut and the salt commissioner stopped coming, Zhou had spent his own money buying rough grain from our village to feed the starving laborers. Lin Xiaoxi had even helped him transport it. A clerk's salary was pitiful, maybe a few dozen taels of silver per year. He'd already spent most of his savings keeping these prisoners alive. Wang Dinglu confirmed he'd never seen the man mistreat a single worker. When laborers got hurt, Zhou quietly let them rest instead of forcing them back into the tunnels. I nodded and had to smile to myself. No wonder a man this honest had been dumped at a remote mine. In the world of government, being too clean and too kind was a quick way to get yourself pushed to the bottom. I respected his character, but his approach was naive. There's an old saying, water that's too clear has no fish. You can't survive in the system by being purely good. You need to know when to bend. Still, a man like Zhou Wenyuan was exactly the kind of person I wanted on my side. Now that I understood Zhou Wenyuan's situation, I needed to handle the medical problem first. I wasn't sure my father-in-law had enough herbs to treat dozens of sick laborers, and in this freezing weather, untreated wind cold could kill people. I didn't want to promise something and then fail. That would damage my father-in-law's reputation. I headed over to the Wang family compound where he lived now. The place was busy, patients coming and going, the whole courtyard smelling of medicinal herbs. Since moving here, my father-in-law had become the only real doctor for thousands of people across Sanhedu. The old doctor in Shango village had basically lost all his patients. I asked him if his herb supply could handle treating the miners. He didn't hesitate for a second. He said even 400 or 500 patients wouldn't be a problem, and he wouldn't charge them a single coin. I talked him out of the free part. He needed to at least cover his costs so he could keep buying herbs and keep treating people. That's how you build something sustainable. That's when he told me something troubling. Buying herbs wasn't really an option anymore. A company called the Taiha Medicine Bureau had appeared across the empire about 2 years ago. They'd opened branches in every major city, including Tianyong City. They bought up all available medicinal herbs at 50% above market price and locked down every herb farmer in the country under exclusive contracts. Within 2 years, most independent pharmacies had been forced to close. My father-in-law's old clinic shutting down was partly their doing. And this all started right when wars broke out along every border. Not a coincidence. I saw the scheme immediately. Someone powerful, probably multiple court officials, was behind Taiha. They cornered the herb market, drove prices sky high, then sold back to the government at inflated wartime prices. They were robbing ordinary people and draining the imperial treasury at the same time. A brilliant and ruthless operation. I almost felt sorry for the emperor. He was surrounded by officials who were bleeding his empire dry while he obsessed over holding onto his throne. My father-in-law's existing stockpile was mostly herbs he'd stored before his clinic closed, plus whatever villagers brought back from the mountains. That supply wouldn't last forever, especially once I expanded the army. I told him that come spring, he should pick some young villagers and take them into the mountains to learn herb identification and collection. We needed our own dedicated herb gathering team. Our medicine reserves were just as critical as food and weapons. I couldn't let some corrupt pharmacy chain hold us hostage. Sooner or later, I'd have to deal with the Taiha Medicine Bureau directly. I sent someone to the mine to tell Zhou Wenyuan to bring his sick workers to my father-in-law for treatment. Then I headed home. When I reached my gate, there was a man standing outside holding a wooden pitchfork, waiting for me. The man at my gate was Tian Laoba, my horse ranch manager. He'd been one of my most trusted people since the early days. I'd given him a special job months ago, collecting horse manure. Not for farming, for making saltpeter. Horse dung, layered with wood ash and old wall soil, left to ferment for months, then boiled down and crystallized. That's how you extract crude saltpeter. The key ingredient for gunpowder. Village chief, I finally made that stuff you wanted. My eyes lit up. He led me to a shed near the horse ranch. The smell was absolutely awful. A pool of reeking liquid from fermented manure, workers boiling it down, and several large jars of cooling solution already forming crystals. The workers had cloth tied over their faces and didn't seem to mind anymore. The process had taken months. Winter slowed the fermentation badly. Tian Laoba had to build fires next to the fermentation pits to keep temperatures high enough. Without that trick, we wouldn't have gotten results until spring. He proudly hauled out a small sack, about 70 or 80 pounds of crude yellow crystals. Raw saltpeter, ready for me to purify. What's this stuff for, village chief? I grinned. It's a seasoning. Put some in your food. His face went green. Something extracted from horse dung as a food seasoning? He looked ready to vomit. I laughed and told him I was joking, that I had important uses for it. I didn't explain further. The production process itself couldn't really be kept secret. Too many workers involved at every stage. But the final purification step, which determined whether the gunpowder would actually work, that knowledge stayed with me alone. Without proper purity, the powder was useless. That was my insurance. I told Tian Laoba to keep going and produce 10 sacks by spring. Combined with the saltpeter Wu Santong had brought back from the south, I'd have roughly 5 sacks of usable gunpowder material. Enough to start developing firearms. And with a reliable gunpowder supply secured, there was no reason to keep my crossbow technology hidden anymore. I could now tell Zhuzi to begin mass-producing crossbows openly and equip the entire Howling Tiger army. I was already planning the new army structure in my head. 3,000 soldiers total. 300 heavy wolf cavalry under Lu Lang with crossbows. 500 light cavalry with curved swords. 700 shield infantry. And 1,000 dedicated crossbowmen armed with heavy repeating crossbows. That last group would be the real terror. No archer unit in this world could stand against them. I walked home carrying the sack of crude saltpeter with a huge smile on my face. Mu Wanqing was just getting back from helping at her father's clinic. What are you so happy about? I reminded her of the small hand crossbow I'd made for her a while back. She'd tested it and been amazed. It could punch through armor at 30 or 40 paces. She'd asked why I didn't equip everyone with crossbows if they were this powerful. I told her then that if the technology spread to enemies, we'd be in serious trouble. She'd kept her crossbow hidden ever since, guarding the secret carefully. Now I told her things had changed. I had a new weapon idea in development, so I could finally release the crossbow design for mass production. Starting tomorrow, Zhuzi would lead workers in building crossbows at scale for the whole army. Even if the barbarians came back, we'd be ready. Her eyes sparkled. She trusted me completely. Always had. Always would. Mu Wanqing trusted me completely. She'd seen the crossbow's power with her own eyes, and she knew the larger siege crossbow was even deadlier. When I joked that my gun was the most impressive of all, she blushed and whispered something flirtatious in my ear about helping me polish it. That girl looked quiet and proper on the outside, but she was actually the boldest of all my wives. We didn't make it far before ducking into the bedroom. She talked a big game, but couldn't back it up, surrendered halfway through, crying and promising she'd try again next time. That combination of feistiness and vulnerability was exactly why I couldn't get enough of her. That night, all my wives slept together with me as usual. The next morning, I headed to the river where Wu Jiang and several water fort leaders were waiting. The fort construction was basically complete, and they wanted me to inspect it. We rode down on wooden ice sleds that Wu Jiang had cleverly rigged with paddle-like poles, for men per sled, pushing against the ice like rowing a boat. Fast and efficient. I'd originally built the sleds just for hauling construction materials across the frozen river, but Wu Jiang had turned them into a real transportation system. The ride was terrifying, though. My first time on one, and I was gripping the sides the whole way. The results were impressive. The old swampy area around the water fort had been completely transformed. They'd stacked cut stone blocks along the riverbank into high walls. Wu Jiang said they'd finished the main construction early and decided to build defensive walls just for fun. He planned to keep expanding and raising them until the whole fort became an impregnable fortress. The original dock where I'd first attacked this place now had a proper gate structure. Wooden pilings driven into the riverbed supported a large floating platform extending over the water, with the shoreside anchored by massive stone foundations. It could hold 7 or 8 government ships, or 20 smaller merchant vessels. I spotted one issue right away: the shallow water. Years of reed growth had let silt build up. Loaded cargo ships would sit deeper in the water and could easily run aground. I told Wu Jiang to have divers clear the mud once spring came, but not to dig too deep or it would undermine the shore structures. Wu Jiang was amazed I knew about ship draft. But in this era, few people in the empire understood waterway management. The nation was mostly landlocked. Yu Kingdom and other states blocked access to the sea, and the Boyao nation sat between them and the eastern coast. Past the gate, the burned ruins from my original attack had been completely cleared. Neat rows of wooden buildings now lined both sides. Not living quarters, but warehouses for merchant ships to rent, and some had been fitted with beds to serve as inns for traveling traders. It wasn't big money, but every bit of income helped. I hadn't told Wu Jiang to build the warehouses and inns. He'd thought of it himself. I gave him a thumbs up. The man had a better head for business than I'd expected. I reminded Wu Jiang to watch for any ships carrying medicinal herbs, especially ones belonging to the Taiha Medicine Bureau. If any passed through, he was to board them under the authority of Zenhidu's routine inspections and record everything. He nodded without asking why. That was one of the things I liked about him. He just did what needed doing. The rest of the water fort was well organized. Wu Jiang kept the place spotless. Past the warehouses and in buildings, a fence separated the residential area where the 5 groups of former bandits lived. Further up sat a large meeting hall with 3 small watchtowers behind it, just like a bandit stronghold. I laughed when I saw it. This looks exactly like a bandit hideout. Wu Jiang scratched his head awkwardly. Old habits. I told him to build elevated platforms in all 4 directions for archers and heavy crossbows. Without proper defenses, this fort wasn't a fortress, it was a tomb. He understood immediately. He remembered how I'd burned the original water fort to the ground. He brought up another matter. His people wanted to send some men to join the Howling Tiger army once construction was finished. But with only 200 people total across all 5 groups, they couldn't fill much of my 2,000-man gap. I told him not to worry about joining the main army. Instead, his people would handle all security for the water fort. He hesitated. I could read his face. He was still worried I didn't fully trust him because of his identity. He was a former prince of the previous dynasty. Joining the army meant accessing my weapons technology, and he feared that would make me suspicious of him. So I told him I'd be sending 4 heavy crossbows to the fort once the platforms were built. His eyes went wide. He knew these weapons. Zhai Shanchuan had told him about their devastating power on the battlefield. He also knew I guarded the designs so closely that even the Fengling army only got to borrow them, never the blueprints. Thank you, village chief. He bowed deeply at 90 degrees. Then I asked him something I'd been turning over in my mind. Wu Jiang, have you ever thought about restoring your dynasty? He nearly lost his footing. His heartbeat must have tripled. He tried to laugh it off, but I cut through the act. I reminded him that we'd already discussed his identity openly before. He knew that I knew he was a prince of the fallen dynasty. If I'd wanted to harm him, I could have turned him in to the emperor long ago and received a noble title in return. But instead, I'd trusted him with an important post, given him autonomy, and now I was arming his fort with my best weapons. And we shared a common enemy, the emperor who'd just imprisoned the woman I loved. If I were willing to support your restoration, would you accept? He thought for a long moment, then smiled bitterly. He understood what support really meant. He'd be the figurehead while I held the real power. A puppet emperor. But he also recognized that I'd asked instead of forced. That was more courtesy than any warlord in history had ever shown. If you're willing, I'll follow your lead in everything, he said. If you don't want to, forget I asked. I waved my hand casually, showing no displeasure at all. That threw him off even more. He couldn't read me. I'd already thought it through. With Wu Zhang's royal blood and banner, the former dynasty's loyalists across Yuzhou and Yinzhou would rally to us in huge numbers. But his existence was a double-edged sword. Other underground restoration factions would resent an outsider like me controlling their prince. Using him would open doors, but it would also create new enemies. For now, I left the question hanging. Whether I'd need that card depended on what the emperor did next with Xiaoshan. Wang Dinglu had told me everything about Wu Zhang's background long ago. I could tell Wu Jiang didn't have ambitions to rule the world. He just wanted his people to live decent lives. And honestly, if I had enough materials to build advanced weapons, I could sweep across the entire empire by myself. There was no need to rebel yet. But I'd planted a seed in Wu Zhong's mind. He was smart enough to figure out the rest on his own. If I ever did take power, I'd treat the people well. He could see that from how I ran things now. And given his royal bloodline and my strategic abilities, he'd probably start making quiet preparations behind the scenes without me even asking. After leaving the water fort, I decided to scout the surrounding area instead of heading straight home. I climbed a tall hill and surveyed everything below. It was mid-January, with maybe 10 more days until February. The snow in the mountains hadn't melted yet, but it was getting thinner. I spotted a nice valley near Lu Lang's tribal settlement, perfect for growing chili peppers come spring. Then I walked down to the main road heading south toward Yuzhou City. This was the same road the Fengling army had used to march to Tianyong City. It was wide, well-traveled, snow already trampled away by foot traffic. I found a large flat area nearby and thought it would make an excellent location for a roadside inn. Travelers and merchants would pay for food and lodging, and it was still within Zenhidu's territory. On my way back through a shortcut, a man suddenly appeared on the path. "Hey brother, you a hunter from around here?" He saw my fur coat and beast skin boots and assumed I was some local trapper. He had a small braid, wore thin, ragged clothing, and his cloth shoes were soaked through. He could barely stand straight. I recognized what he was immediately, a deserter from Pang Shouyang's army. He walked up with a greasy smile, put his hand on my shoulder, and told me to hand over my fur coat so he could sell it for travel money. He said he'd repay me by only beating me half to death instead of killing me. Then 5 or 6 more deserters crept out of the surrounding trees, all dressed the same, ragged, starving, desperate, probably from the same hometown down south, trying to get home after fleeing the disaster Pang Shouyang had led them into. Without robbing people for supplies, they'd freeze to death out here. "There's too many of you for one coat," I said calmly. "I've got plenty of furs and clothes at home. Why don't you all come with me to get them?" I glanced toward a nearby hilltop. I'd already spotted one of my scouts crouching in the snow, watching. When he confirmed it was me, the idiot actually waved at me. I gave him a subtle signal to go fetch reinforcements. The deserters sensed something was off. The leader lunged for my throat, screaming threats about snapping my neck. Pathetic. I caught his wrist mid-grab, twisted it into a lock, and pinned him down. He howled in pain, then tried to headbutt me from behind. A classic dirty trick. These types were useless on the battlefield, but full of cheap moves. I tilted my head to dodge, then struck his temple with a protruding knuckle punch. He went limp and collapsed like a sack of grain. These deserters were exactly what I needed for expanding the Howling Tiger army. I hadn't planned to kill the first one. I wanted to use him to find the larger groups. But he'd forced my hand with that headbutt trick. My knuckle strike had caused internal bleeding in his skull. He was done. I reached for my curved sword, but when I drew it, the blade was stuck in the scabbard. Zhang Taichu had made the sheath poorly, and a wooden retaining piece had jammed the blade inside. All I pulled out was a handle. Unbelievable. I made a mental note to have words with that blacksmith. Didn't matter. The remaining deserters weren't interested in fighting. They turned and ran. They'd clearly already sold their weapons for food long ago. That's why they were ambushing lone travelers on the road with bare hands. Before they got far, hoofbeats thundered from the village direction. Wang Dinglu charged in first, knocking one deserter flying with his horse. He leaped off and tackled another into the snow. 3 more riders swept up behind him and had the rest pinned down in seconds. Wang Dinglu rushed over to check on me, looking terrified. His sentries had let a group of armed men get this close to their commander. That was a serious failure on his watch. I pointed out that his new lookouts were useless. These deserters had obviously spotted the sentry posts and patrols already, which is why they chose to ambush outside the village perimeter. If it had been anyone else walking by, that person would be dead and the sentries wouldn't have lifted a finger. Wang Dinglu hung his head. He explained that his experienced men had been transferred to the mine, and the replacements were raw recruits he hadn't finished training. He'd figured this southern approach was safe enough since Shango village and Lu Lang's tribal settlement were nearby. I understood his reasoning, but couldn't let it slide. Discipline is discipline. I told him to decide his own punishment. He said 30 lashes for himself and his men. I told him lashes were too harsh. He barely had enough people as it was, and injuring them would leave the post unmanned. I sent him to Lin Xiaoxi for a caning instead. Then I turned to the prisoners. These men were the worst kind of soldier, cowards who ran from battle and turned to robbing civilians. I couldn't recruit them, put them in my army, and they'd desert again at the first sign of danger. But I couldn't release them either. They'd just keep terrorizing people. They had to die. But first, I needed information. One of you gets to live. Whoever answers my questions best walks free. Where did the main group of deserters from the Tianyong Reinforcement Army end up? I want locations, and I want the biggest groups. They all started screaming through their gags at once. Wang Dinglu pulled the cloth off the loudest one. The man babbled about 500 or 600 deserters holed up in a cave a few dozen miles south. I stared at him coldly. You're lying. 500 or 600 men eating how much food every day? And hiding in a cave with no escape route? They'd starve or get trapped. Try again, and remember your head is still attached to your shoulders, for now. I glanced at Wang Dinglu. He understood. He dragged the liar aside and knocked him unconscious with 2 punches. The remaining deserters were terrified after watching Wang Dinglu knock out their buddy. I pointed at the one with the most panicked expression and had his gag removed. He started babbling about the cave, saying those people were guarding something, some kind of treasure or big secret. I had the others ungagged too. They all talked over each other with jumbled information, but one thing was consistent. There really were a lot of people holed up in that cave, and they were staying for a reason. I'd already decided to kill these men. They were beyond saving as soldiers. But the first one I'd knocked out, the one who'd given the most exaggerated story, I kept him alive. His details matched what the others said when I cross-checked their stories. I woke him up with a slap and asked if he remembered the path to the cave. Then I sent Wang Dinglu with a team to scout it out, taking this survivor as a guide. That night, a massive blizzard hit. I was warm at home with my wives when urgent knocking came at the door. Wang Dinglu stumbled and covered in blood. They'd been ambushed. The cave people had sentries posted a mile out. His team got hit by archers before they got anywhere close. 2 of his men were badly wounded. They'd lost so much blood they'd passed out on the way back. He'd sent them to my father-in-law for treatment. These weren't ordinary deserters. They had organized defenses, hidden lookouts, and coordinated attacks. Someone with real military experience was leading them. Then Wang Dinglu told me something that made my blood run cold. During the encounter, he'd heard them speaking the Old Wei Kingdom language, the local dialect from when this region was an independent nation 100 years ago. That was strange. Pang Shuiyang's army came from the south. The Old Wei Kingdom only controlled Yuzhou and Yinzhou in the north. How were southern soldiers connected to Wei loyalists? I told Wang Dinglu to rest. We'd investigate after the storm passed. The next day at noon, the blizzard finally stopped. Everything was buried in white. I stepped outside and started giving Lin Xiaoxi instructions about village security. With so many deserters roaming the area and now this mysterious cave group, before I could finish my sentence, I heard arrows cutting through the air above me. I threw myself sideways on instinct. Several arrows thudded into the ground where I'd been standing. They'd come to us. My mind raced. This wasn't random. These had to be the cave people. If they detected Wang Dinglu's scouting party, they could have easily tracked his retreat back to the village. Wang Dinglu's team making it home alive was probably intentional. They'd been allowed to escape so they could be followed. The attackers had likely killed our forward sentries in the night, then crept into the village under cover of the blizzard. Whoever was leading them knew military tactics. Lin Xiaoxi reacted fast. Her guards raised shields around me while she pulled her people behind the courtyard walls. Then a long, sharp whistle cut through the air, our emergency signal. Within moments, answering whistles came from every direction. Wu Xiangyue at the training grounds, Lu Lang's tribal warriors. Everyone heard it and knew something was wrong. The attackers had penetrated deep into the village, almost to the center, which meant they'd taken out a lot of our sentries along the way. Their arrows were meant to eliminate Lin Xiaoxi's snow-clearing patrol, but the distance was too far, the angle was bad, and their aim wasn't good enough. They'd missed and given away their position instead. The situation was bad, but not hopeless. 2 shield soldiers escorted me to safety while I assessed the situation through the viewing slit. There were at least 100 attackers, well-coordinated, moving with proper military formation, far better than any bandits I'd fought before. They were clearly trained soldiers. Then I heard the thundering hooves. Lu Lang and his wolf cavalry were coming. Game over. The attackers' leader figured it out too late. They'd followed Wang Dinglu's trail back to our village, thinking they were dealing with some small militia. They had no idea they'd just walked into the headquarters of the Howling Tiger Army, the same force that had crushed the barbarian elite. When they saw 300 wolf cavalry charging at them with those massive chopping blades, they knew they were finished. Lu Lang didn't bother chasing the runners. He knew the Linghu brothers were behind him with shield soldiers and archers forming a net. Nobody was getting out. He just focused on cutting down everyone in front of him. The whole thing was over quickly. When we checked the village afterward, we found 6 of our sentries dead at their posts. These cave people had silently killed them during the night to clear a path. If Wang Dinglu hadn't been with me organizing troops, he'd probably be dead too. We captured a few alive. They cursed at me in the Old Wei Kingdom language, swearing at my ancestors going back 18 generations. Wang Dinglu translated nervously. I said, "Oh," and smiled coldly. "Fine. No more questions. Bring me the catapults. Cut off these prisoners' hands and feet. Give them herbs to stop the bleeding and keep them alive. When we get to the cave, they'll be my ammunition. Everyone prepare to march. We're going to that cave." I was furious. Training each of my soldiers took enormous effort, and these people had killed over a dozen of mine in 2 days. Now they'd attacked my village. They didn't get to exist anymore. Within 15 minutes, 1,000 fully armed Howling Tiger soldiers were ready to move. I left Lin Xiaoxi guarding the village with the militia and brought the catapults along. Meanwhile, at the water fort, Wu Jiang was feeling a strange tightness in his chest all morning. He didn't know why. He kept working despite the discomfort, too much to do before spring. After about 2 hours of marching, we approached the cave area. I knew there'd be hidden sentries and ambush archers, so I pushed the tower shield soldiers forward in a triangular formation, advancing slowly. Wang Dinglu spotted movement ahead and rode back to report. Someone was waving a flag in the mountain pass. Yellow, the military color for requesting negotiations. Wang Dinglu explained that yellow meant parley, white meant surrender. I laughed. Negotiate? They want to talk now? They didn't feel like talking when they were killing my man. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my crossbow from the saddle and aimed at the man waving the yellow negotiation flag. My officers stayed quiet. Technically, you're not supposed to kill a messenger between armies. But these people had ambushed my village and murdered my sentries. They threw out the rules first. I pulled the trigger. The bolt flew across the distance, and the man crumpled into the snow, staining it red. Advance. Kill them all. My officers charged forward with their units. Just as I'd guessed, the cave people had no archers left. They'd sent every bowman to attack the village. The fight was completely one-sided. Within minutes, we'd cut through to the cave entrance. Bodies were piled outside by the time I rode up. They dragged their leader before my horse. He wasn't dressed like a soldier at all. Plain clothes, no military markings. Wang Dinglu ripped open his collar and revealed a tattoo, a flying serpent, the symbol of the Heaven and Earth Society, the Tiandahui. Even beaten bloody, this man stayed calm. He told me he'd planned to offer me a chance to join their organization. He warned me that the Tiandahui would issue a kill order against me, and my little Howling Tiger army was nothing but ants compared to their power. I laughed in his face. You killed my people, attacked my home, and you want to negotiate? The only thing waiting for you is death. When Wang Dinglu raised his blade, the man suddenly shouted for me to stop. He said whatever was inside the cave involved something enormous, and if I touched it, not even the emperor could save me. I ignored him and rode straight into the cave with a torch. The Tiandahui was nothing but a bunch of opportunists hiding behind the banner of restoring the Old Wei Kingdom. They'd hurt my people. I didn't care what they called themselves. The cave was deep. The first 200 meters were natural rock, then it became a man-made tunnel. Along the walls, my soldiers had captured about a dozen stonemasons, ordinary civilians who'd been forced to work here. Their tools were high quality, much better than normal farming implements. As I walked deeper, a sharp smell hit me. I already knew what this was. An ancient tomb, Shai Shanchuan nodded grimly. We can't tell whose it is yet, but the burial chamber hasn't been touched. Looks like they'd just broken through the passage. I pieced together the story. The Tiandahui had arrived after the barbarians retreated, when Yozhou's defenses were weak. They'd found Pang Shouyang's scattered deserters and recruited them through a mix of promises and threats, then put them to work guarding and excavating this site. grave robbing to fund military operations. It was an old trick. Plenty of warlords throughout history had done the same thing. The Tiandahui was clearly experienced at this. They'd probably already looted every tomb in Yenzhou and were now expanding into Yuzhou. Zhai Shanchuan asked what we should do, seal it up or keep digging. He was thinking about Wu Jiang. This tomb likely belonged to Wu Jiang's ancestors from the old Wei dynasty. Digging it up meant robbing his family's graves. I looked at the stonemasons, then back at the tunnel full of gold and silver the Tiandahui hadn't managed to carry out. If they can dig it, so can I. Have these stonemasons keep working. We're expanding the army soon, and we need every coin we can get. Besides, I didn't open this tomb. The Tiandahui did. And whatever came out would ultimately benefit Wu Jiang's people anyway, since he was part of my operation now. If I needed to, I'd put this on his account. Moral hesitation? That kind of soft thinking would get me killed. I was building something here, and sentiment couldn't get in the way. Under Zhai Shanchuan's direction, the stonemasons got right back to work. They didn't care who they were digging for. Staying alive was all that mattered. I set one rule: no one touches the remains. Respect the dead. Though after 100 years underground with the main entrance collapsed, there wasn't much left but bones anyway. I did think about Wu Jiang. This was technically his ancestor's tomb. But by evening, when we'd cleared everything out and found the burial inscription, it turned out to be a minor branch of the early Wei royal family, barely connected to Wu Jiang's line at all. The hall was enormous. Jewelry, jade, pearls, plus stacks of silver and gold bricks. The gold and silver alone was worth over 8,000 taels. I'd keep the precious metals for now and sell the jewelry next time I went to Yuzhou City, along with the straight saber Zhang Taichu had forged. Back in the village, I sent a rider to Wanhuang County overnight to tell Wu Santong to mobilize his entire escort company. They'd leave for Yuzhou City tomorrow to sell the goods. Zhai Shanchuan went to tell Wu Jiang about the tomb. Wu Jiang didn't say anything about it. Good. That night, I fitted the saber's blade and handle properly and set aside the spearhead Zhang Taichu had made. Mu Wanqing came in and saw me packing. Going far? I told her I was heading to Yuzhou City with the escort company. It might take a while. She relaxed when she heard it wasn't a military campaign. Then she got crafty. She said since I'd be gone so long, I should bring a woman along to take care of me. She'd already figured out the logistics. She was busy managing army supplies. Wanqing was handling family welfare visits. Wu Xiangyue was running village defense. The only one free was Lu Yin, my personal maid. I raised an eyebrow. Lu Yin again? She pretended to pout, asking if I thought she was sending Lu Yin along to spy on me. Then she grinned and said she actually wished I'd bring home more wives. The four of them could barely keep up with my stamina. She said I was like a bull. I laughed. Since arriving in this world, I'd been focused on building something great. I had enough wonderful wives already, plus Xiaoshan's suffering in the capital. I wasn't interested in collecting more women. I wasn't my war horse, who'd mounted every mare in the stable and still wasn't satisfied. Wanqing smiled mischievously and said she'd been teaching Lu Yin some special techniques, and that I should personally inspect the results. Before I could respond to that provocation, I grabbed her and carried her to the bedroom. She'd started the fire. Now she could deal with the consequences. One by one, each wife who came home got pulled in two. Lu Yin joined last. The battle lasted hours. The next morning, I woke up with only Lu Yin beside me. The others had already gotten up and gone about their duties, leaving her sleeping. She woke up flustered, face burning red. Despite being part of our household for a long time, she was still shy about intimacy. I held her close and teased her about her morning service skills. She blinked those big eyes at me, completely flustered, and innocently asked how my other wives usually handled mornings. After a leisurely morning with Lu Yin, I finally got dressed and stepped outside. Wu Santong and his escort company had been waiting. The gold and silver from the tomb were already secured, and they'd been loading the jewelry and porcelain onto carts for the trip to Yuzhou City. Since this wasn't a combat mission, I finally rode my prized warhorse, the black Wuzhuai. I usually kept him away from battles to protect him for breeding. I lifted Lu Yin onto the saddle in front of me. She'd never been outside our territory before and couldn't ride, so I held her in my arms. Wu Zhuai got excited and started bucking. The last time I'd put a woman on his back was Wu Xiangyue, and afterward I'd rewarded him with a bunch of mares. He thought the same deal was happening again. I smacked him on the head. Lu Yin wasn't a skilled rider like Xiang Yue. If the horse spooked her, that would be trouble. Wu Jue sulked the entire journey after that, dragging his hooves like a deflated ball. He only perked up when we entered the city and spotted some pretty mares on the street. Yuzhou City was impressive. The capital of the entire province, it dwarfed Tianyong City. A single wall section was 10 times longer. It had the feel of a real metropolis. Wu Santong knew the city from previous visits. His escort company credentials got the caravan through the gate inspection smoothly. The carts carrying our treasure passed without trouble. But when I reached the gate myself, a guard spotted Wu Jue and froze. He recognized the horse as a barbarian breed and immediately leveled his spear at my throat. That's a northern barbarian horse. Who are you? Why are you riding an enemy horse into the city? More soldiers swarmed over, all pointing weapons at me. Civilians gathered to watch. Lu Yin was terrified, pressing herself against my chest, whimpering about prison and execution. I patted her head calmly. Relax. It's fine. I explained that the horse was a war trophy, perfectly legal. The guard asked for proof. I showed him my military officer's waist badge and the Linghu family's command token. Between those two, I figured my identity was clear enough. The Linghu family was the top power in Tianyong City, closely tied to the Fengling army. The guard stared blankly at both items. He didn't recognize either one. He'd never heard of the Linghu family token. He didn't even know what a Howling Tiger Army officer badge looked like. What is this junk? You're impersonating the Howling Tiger Army? I think you're a barbarian spy. You think you can fool me with some broken trinket? Not a chance. A gate captain walked over, a petty officer in leather armor with a sword at his hip. He took one look at me and started barking orders. Get off the horse. How dare I ride a barbarian horse into the city? He accused me of being a spy and threatened to have me arrested. I stared down at him coldly. Say one more stupid thing and I'll sew your mouth shut. He was just a gate captain. I was the commander of the Howling Tiger Army. Even my official post at Zenhidu made me his equal in rank. I wasn't afraid of this clown. He lunged for me, screaming about treason and how he'd make me suffer. Wu Santong rushed in to smooth things over, trying to slip the captain 10 taels of silver. The captain slapped Wu Santong across the face and knocked the money to the ground. He stamped the coins into the mud while ranting about how he couldn't be bribed, though notably, he didn't pick the silver up and return it. He just wanted more. Lu Yin was trembling in my arms, begging me to just leave. I patted her head and told her to stay calm and sit still on the horse. I'd been willing to let it go. Standing guard in the cold all day was a miserable job. But this man had struck my father-in-law and terrified my woman. That crossed the line. I dismounted slowly. The captain grinned, thinking I was scared. He told me to crawl between his legs as an apology, then pointed at Wu Jue and declared the horse was being confiscated as government property. He was still talking when I drew my curved sword. One of the guards saw the flash of steel and shouted a warning. Too late. My blade traced a cold arc through the air and the captain's head rolled off his shoulders onto the ground. His body stood there for a moment, blood fontaining from the neck, before it collapsed. The guards froze. The crowd scattered screaming, then stopped at a distance to watch. Wu Santong went white. He stammered that I'd killed an imperial officer. That was a capital crime. I wiped the blood off my blade on the dead man's clothes, sheathed it calmly, and sighed. Finally, some peace and quiet. Some people just can't see the situation they're in. 30-plus guards surrounded me with weapons drawn. They were about to charge when a voice shouted from inside the gate. Stop! A man rode up on horseback. It was Zhou Wangue, the Salt and Iron Commissioner. The same man I'd won over with fish dinners back at the mine. He was heading out on official business when he spotted the commotion. He'd actually watched the head go flying and nearly fell off his own horse. He rode straight past the dead body without even glancing at it and asked me what happened. He was worried, but not about the dead captain. He was worried about me. If I got locked up, who would cook him fresh fish when he visited the mine? I saw my opportunity and put on my most serious face. I had no choice. This man kept insisting I was a barbarian spy even after I showed him my credentials. Think about it. I clearly couldn't be a spy. So why was he so desperate to frame me? There's only one explanation. He was the real spy. He was trying to silence me before I exposed him. I said it with a completely straight face, as if it were the most logical conclusion in the world. Zhou Wangue looked stunned. He'd known this gate captain for nearly 20 years. The man was greedy, liked his drink, and had a habit of groping women passing through the gate. But a barbarian spy? That was ridiculous. But I wasn't going to let facts get in the way of a good argument. Commissioner Zhou, answer me this. Am I or am I not the man who defeated the barbarians? You are? Did this gate captain ever fight on a battlefield? Ever kill an enemy? Well, no. He just accused me, a war hero, of being a barbarian spy. This horse is a trophy I took from the first bandit I ever killed. Riding a war prize makes me a traitor? He wanted me dead over this. Tell me, Commissioner, did he deserve what he got? Zhou stammered. I pressed harder. The falling army has returned to the capital. If the barbarians come back, who stops them? Me. If this man had killed me today, there'd be nobody to defend Tianyong City. If Tianyong falls, how long before Yuzhou City falls too? Zhou sucked in a breath. He was actually buying it. So a man who tries to eliminate the only defender standing between the barbarians and Yuzhou, what would you call that, if not a spy? My logic was absurd but airtight enough to give Zhou the excuse he needed. Yuzhou was the emperor's stronghold, run by the emperor's loyalists. This gate captain embarrassing a war hero was an embarrassment to the emperor himself. Zhou could spin this however he wanted. He stroked his chin and agreed it was entirely possible. The captain was planted by some rival faction. He said he'd report the matter to the city governor personally. He let me enter the city under his guarantee, with the condition that I stay at the Fulai Inn and not leave Yuzhou until the matter was resolved. I thanked him and rode through the gate. Wu Santong was practically shaking with relief. When I told him Zhou was just a salt and iron commissioner, his jaw dropped. In Yuzhou, the Salt and Iron Bureau was the most powerful office around. Wu Santong couldn't believe I'd made connections at that level. I didn't bother explaining. A few fish, that's all it had cost me. Curious civilians followed our caravan through the streets, whispering about the man who'd just beheaded a city officer without blinking. They stared at our heavily loaded carts and speculated wildly about what was inside. Foreign tribute, barbarian corpses, treasure. Wu Santong didn't mind the attention. For a merchant, gossip was free advertising. The main street of Yuzhou was twice as wide as Tianyong City's and stretched endlessly. We made our way to a grand building with massive stone lions flanking the entrance, crimson doors, and an impressive signboard overhead. This was a high-end auction house called the Tingyu Pavilion. Wu Santong had told me about it. It used to be called the Yaji Gallery before new ownership took over last year. They offered appraisal, valuation, auction services, and private sales. They also purchased especially rare items outright, or acquired specific pieces on behalf of powerful clients who preferred to stay anonymous. My plan was to consign all the tomb jewelry and porcelain here, let them find buyers, and pay them a commission. I also had Zhang Tiechu's straight saber to sell. The staff recognized Wu Santong's escort company immediately and came out to greet us. Wu Santong pointed them toward me as the real owner of the goods. I cut short the pleasantries. I'm in a hurry, and there are too many eyes out here. Open the doors. We'll talk inside. The attendant saw the deep cart tracks on the ground and knew this was big business. He opened the gates, and we rolled into a stone-paved courtyard where other merchant carts were parked, clearly the inspection and staging area for transactions. I told them to bring all their appraisers immediately. No wasting time. While we waited, another attendant appeared and whistled over a massive man, easily over 6 feet tall, built like a wall. But his eyes were vacant and unfocused, and he was bound in heavy iron chains. The attendant barked at him to kneel. Please dismount, honored guest. Step on his back, a living stepstool. Apparently, this was the Tingyu Pavilion's VIP treatment, reserved for high-value clients. They'd rolled it out on my first visit because they could tell from the loaded carts that I had serious merchandise. Lu Yin whispered to me that the giant man looked pitiful. She had a soft heart. She'd been a poor girl herself before I took her in. I pinched her cheek gently. You were a servant too, remember? But I take care of you. That's the difference. I told her to follow my lead and act the part. She wasn't the girl who'd been traded for a bucket of grain anymore. She was my woman now, and my status was her status. She needed to understand that she'd already risen above most people. She just hadn't realized it yet. Something clicked in her eyes. She nodded seriously and carefully stepped onto the giant's shoulder as I helped her down. I stepped heavily on his back, deliberately testing him. The man didn't flinch. Strong, obedient, and clearly mistreated. I made my decision instantly. I'm buying this man. The attendant blinked. Sir, he's not for sale. He belongs to the pavilion. You're a business. Everything has a price. You don't say no to a customer. I locked eyes with him and let my voice go cold. I have one rule. I don't like hearing the word no. This is your first offense. There won't be a second. The attendant went pale and scrambled off to find the manager. They led me to a private room in the back. The inner chamber had fine wine, tea, snacks, and pretty serving girls for VIP guests. The outer room had a large table with shelves and cases brought in for appraisal work. The attendants unloaded every crate from the carts. The room was packed floor to ceiling, barely space to stand. A team of appraisers filed in, led by their head expert. The moment they saw the items, the old dirt still clinging to them, the unmistakable characteristics of ancient artifacts, they knew exactly where these had come from. Underground. Tomb goods. I caught the looks they exchanged. Subtle, calculating glances. They assumed I was some desperate grave robber they could lowball. Tomb raiders were usually outlaws with no leverage, easy targets for dishonest dealers. They were very wrong about me. I already understood the house rules. First came the appraisal. Then they'd set a floor price, say 30,000 taels. That's what they'd guarantee me regardless of final sale price. If the goods sold for more, the pavilion kept a 10% commission on top. If they sold for less, the pavilion ate the loss. The trick was in the appraisal. For a stranger who didn't know market values, they could call a priceless piece worthless and set the floor laughably low. Then sell it for 10 times that amount and pocket the difference. I had no intention of being played. I knew their game the moment I saw those appraisers exchange glances. They thought I was some ignorant tomb robber they could swindle. This era's auction houses weren't the refined institutions I knew from my previous life. They were basically scam operations dressed up in fancy buildings. I stood up, walked over to the appraisers, and slapped the one in the middle across the face. He staggered into the door frame. I didn't like the look in your eyes, I said. You've got the face of a cheat. Try anything clever with my merchandise and you'll lose your heads without knowing why. They went pale and dropped whatever scheme they'd been cooking up. They knew that even if I roughed them up, the owner wouldn't side with them. Not with this much treasure on the line. A room full of ancient goods was worth far more to the business than a few employees' dignity. I went back to my seat and let the serving girls continue their massage. Nobody was going to cheat me today. The head manager, a man named Zhao Xinyuan, had been lurking outside the door the whole time, listening. His attendant had already told him about me, how I'd killed the gate captain on my way into the city and walked away untouched because some high-ranking salt and iron official vouched for me. Zhao's eyes went wide. Anyone who could behead a military officer in broad daylight and stroll away free was clearly not someone to cross. He smoothed his expression into an oily smile and swept into the room. What an honor. A distinguished guest gracing our humble Tingyu pavilion. He introduced himself, and I gave him only my surname, Liu. Nothing more. He brought up the giant man I'd asked to buy. He offered to give the slave away for free after we concluded our business. Seemed reasonable, but I pushed further. I told him the man was chained up for a reason, clearly dangerous. If he ever hurt me or my household, I'd come back to the pavilion for compensation. So to keep things clean, Zhao should not only give me the man for free, but also pay me 100 taels of silver as a safety deposit. Zhao's smile froze. I'd asked him to hand over his property, pay me for taking it, and call it a good deal. By any normal standard, this was daylight robbery. But that was exactly the point. I needed to establish right from the start that I wasn't someone who played by other people's rules. In this world, the person who sets the terms wins. If I walked in meekly and let them control the negotiation, they'd skin me alive on the appraisal. By acting outrageously confident, slapping their staff, demanding absurd concessions, I made them afraid to try anything dishonest with the actual merchandise. Zhao stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish, completely thrown off balance. He couldn't figure out whether I was insane, incredibly powerful, or both. That was exactly where I wanted him. Manager Zhao, your pavilion has never done a losing deal, has it? Of course not. There's no such thing. Sure there is. Let me explain. I sat up straight and started reasoning with him. If I buy this slave with my own money, then anything that goes wrong afterward is my responsibility. Like if I buy a knife and accidentally cut off something important, I can't blame the knife seller. He nodded. But if you give me a gift, say, medicine to improve my performance in bed, and it makes me bleed from the nose and die. The authorities have to investigate whether you poisoned me." He took a step back. My logic was completely twisted, but he couldn't find the flaw in it. Then I flipped the script. I told him if he didn't want to pay the deposit, just say no. I'd buy the slave for 1 tael of silver instead. But since he'd already offered to give the man away for free, going back on his word would damage the pavilion's reputation. And if he couldn't honor a simple promise about a slave, how could I trust him with a roomful of treasure worth a fortune? That hit the nerve. For an auction house, credibility was everything. Zhao laughed bitterly. He finally understood. I'd been maneuvering him toward this exact point from the beginning. "You truly are brilliant, Mr. Liu." I concede. He ordered someone to bring 100 taels of silver and handed it over. Then he excused himself, clearly afraid that if he stayed any longer, I'd talk him into giving me the whole building. The slap to his appraiser was my warning to the staff. Don't try to cheat me. Walking away with the slave and 100 taels of silver was my warning to the boss. Don't treat me like some desperate grave robber you can swindle. The appraisers were now terrified of making mistakes. They examined each piece with painstaking care, which meant the whole process was going to take days. I left Wu Santong to supervise and decided to take Lu Yin out to see the city. What I didn't know was what Zhao Xinyuan was doing in his study. He entered a hidden room behind a secret mechanism, and inside, he dropped his disguise. He was actually a young eunuch, one of many planted by the emperor across the empire. Nearly every Tingyu pavilion manager in the country was a palace eunuch, placed by the emperor's head eunuch, Wei Gonggong. These auction houses were the emperor's intelligence network and money machine, established just 2 or 3 years ago and spread to every major city. Impossible without imperial backing. Zhao had recognized my goods as tomb artifacts immediately. The last time someone brought in items from an ancient Wei dynasty tomb, it turned out to be the Tiandahui, the rebel restoration movement. Now he was wondering if I was connected to them too. He sat down and started writing a report. Meanwhile, I went to check on the giant. The attendant handed me the chain leash nervously. The man was shackled at his wrists, ankles, and neck with heavy iron links. "Get the key. Take all of this off him." The attendant went white. "Sir, I can't do that. He's incredibly strong. If we unchain him, nobody here can control him. I told you to unlock him. Stop talking and do it." The attendant finally caved and brought the keys. As each chain came off, I could see the damage. The iron collar had left deep marks on the big man's neck, with broken skin in several places. His throat had a wound cut down to the bone. What happened here? He kept making noise, so the manager had his throat cut to shut him up. I looked him over more carefully. His body was covered in scars and wounds, far worse than what was visible at first glance. This man hadn't always been this vacant and broken. Whatever intelligence he'd once had, they'd beaten and tortured it out of him. Lu Yin pressed close to me, her small hands clasped tight. "He's so pitiful, master." She was right. A perfectly good human being, destroyed by cruelty. I asked his name. The attendant didn't know. I put my hand on the big man's shoulder and asked if he could understand me. He nodded slowly. Good. Basic comprehension was still there. He couldn't speak because of the throat wound, but he could communicate. "Follow me." His cloudy eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe hope. He fell in behind me obediently. Then I started my first test. I took off through the crowded streets at a fast, erratic pace, weaving through people and changing direction constantly. Lu Yin was gasping for breath, trying to keep up. But the big man, despite his massive frame, moved with shocking agility. His eyes never left me. He matched every turn, never fell behind, never lost me across several miles of city streets. Excellent. Exactly what I'd hoped for. I finally stopped near the city wall at a shabby little tavern. The sign read, "Moonlight under the city wall," poetic name for a rundown place. Probably some old man's tribute to a lost love. This was clearly where laborers and porters came for cheap meals. I didn't mind. The name alone was worth a drink. "Sit," I told the big man. He Saturday. Point at whatever you want to eat. As much as you want. His dull eyes suddenly sparked with a flash of clarity. That reaction told me a lot. This was my second test. The first was physical ability. This one was behavior and self-control. I saw the potential in this man the moment I laid eyes on him. He was like the legendary bodyguard generals from ancient stories, born to protect someone, built for it. After some hesitation, he pointed at the menu board, duck bone rack. the cheapest meat option. In places like this, they bought leftover carcasses from bigger restaurants, bones with scraps of meat still clinging to them, recooked until the bones themselves were soft enough to chew. It was how the poorest people got their protein. The owner, a thin woman in her 40s with graying hair, apologized that she could only serve half a rack. Supply was limited. I told her that was fine and ordered several bowls of grain porridge and mixed grain rice on the side. The big man devoured 2 bowls of bean porridge and a bowl of grain rice in seconds. He lowered his head when he finished, ashamed to ask for more, or perhaps just not used to being allowed to. Still hungry, he didn't answer, just kept his head down. "Ma'am, keep it coming." I was willing to spend whatever it took. This big man had the potential to be my personal bodyguard, a loyal protector like the legendary warriors of old. The tavern owner, a thin older woman, brought out half a duck bone rack in a clay bowl. She warned me that feeding a starving person too much at once would only make future hunger worse. I pushed the duck bones in front of the big man and told her I'd do as I pleased. He stared at the bones, drooling, but didn't touch them. Instead, he waited for more rice, then ate the grain porridge bowl by bowl, 2 more gone in seconds. I asked if he was full. He stayed silent, but glanced up at me briefly. "Keep it coming, ma'am." His whole body trembled. He tried to speak. Just raspy sounds came out from his ruined throat, but his face showed pure disbelief. Someone was actually letting him eat until he was full. "I told you, eat as much as you want. You need the strength to work for me." Tears welled in his eyes. He gripped the bowl tightly and scraped every last grain clean. Lu Yin watched him with quiet emotion. She'd lived that kind of hunger before I found her. Watching him lick the bowl clean reminded her of the days when she and her father split a single bowl of wild vegetable soup. The owner sat down across from me, arms folded, determined to see how much this giant could eat. 6 bowls was already unheard of. He slowed down eventually, trying to eat more politely since everyone was watching. But his eyes kept drifting back to that duck bone rack. He wouldn't touch it. "Go ahead and eat it. Next time I'll get you a whole roast chicken." After his last bowl, he carefully placed the duck bones in front of me, offering them back. I told him they were his. He shook his head and pushed them toward Lu Yan. She giggled and told him our master ate far better food than this. He should enjoy it himself. He looked back and forth between us, completely lost. I smiled. He had a grateful heart. That mattered more than anything. "Eat the duck bones. But understand, this isn't free. After you eat this, your life belongs to me. You stay by my side. You protect me, no matter what. Even if it means your death, I live. Do that, and you'll never go hungry again. Any food in the world, it's yours." He froze. He'd been chained up as a living footstool for who knows how long. He probably didn't even believe his life was worth a meal. Then his eyes met mine. I let him see everything. No walls, no tricks, just trust. Real trust. Something changed in him. The emptiness in his eyes filled with light. He grabbed the duck bones and ate slowly this time. The first bite tasted like blood and iron. By the third, he tasted the meat, really tasted it. His first meat ever, as far as he could remember. He'd carry that taste for the rest of his life. When he finished, he walked behind me, dropped to his knees, and started kowtowing. Over and over, until his forehead left marks in the ground. No words, he couldn't speak. But he didn't need to. "You don't have a name, so from now on you take my surname. You're Lu Dazhuang." I had the tavern owner wrap up some food in oil paper for him to carry. And so the 3 of us walked out into the streets of Yuzhou City. Me in front, Lu Yin beside me, and behind us a giant of a man with 2 bowls of porridge hanging from his neck and 2 oil paper bundles swinging on his chest. He looked ridiculous, but he walked differently now. Every step was steady and powerful. His back was straight, his chin was up, and his eyes burned with purpose. He wasn't a slave anymore. He was mine. Dazhuang was a different man now. Eyes alive, mind engaged. As we walked around Yuzhou City, I bought various supplies and odds and ends. With Dazhuang behind me, I had a walking freight truck. He carried everything without breaking a sweat. Back at the Tingyu Pavilion, Wu Santong reported that the appraisers had only gotten through a fifth of my goods. Painfully slow. What they'd processed so far was valued at 5,000 taels, and Wu Santong estimated the full lot would bring in around 30,000. Decent money, but with 3,000 soldiers to feed after the expansion, plus the entire Xinhidu population to support until the autumn harvest, it wouldn't last long. Walking the city, I'd counted at least 300,000 residents. Compared to my Zenhidu with 2,000 villagers, or even Tianyong City's 50 or 60,000, this was a real metropolis. That gave me an idea. Recruit soldiers here in Yuzhou City. The population base was huge. Wu Santong was skeptical. I had the Howling Tiger Army banner and documents from Tianyong City, but recruiting here required the provincial governor's seal. The governor was the emperor's man through and through. He'd know that my army operated under the Linghu family's authority, and with the emperor actively suppressing the Lingus, getting permission would be nearly impossible. I needed a legitimate reason to build up forces. Then it hit me, bandit suppression. My old specialty. I'd already cleaned out every bandit near Tianyong City, but the mountains around Yuzhou City still had plenty. I headed straight back to the city gate, the same gate where I'd killed the captain hours earlier. Wu Santong thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. The dead captain's deputy had already taken over, and that man owed his promotion to me whether he liked it or not. At the notice board, I found what I was looking for among a handful of wanted posters. One bounty notice stood out: Flying Fire Mountain Bandits. 1,000 taels reward for elimination. I ripped it off the wall. Interesting, the bandit leader was a woman. The new gate captain stormed out immediately. First you kill someone at my gate. Now you're tearing down official notices? You're out of control. A crowd gathered. People whispered about the Flying Fire Mountain bounty. It had been posted for over 2 years. The government had sent military expeditions against these bandits multiple times and failed every time. Nobody had ever dared take the notice down. Then a government clerk who was supposed to be guarding the notice board wandered back from the toilet. He gaped at me holding the torn-down poster. "Do you know what taking that notice means?" I smirked. "Obviously, it means I'm going to wipe out the Flying Fire Mountain bandits. What else would I use this paper for?" He turned red. I glanced at his hands and laughed. "Oh, I see. You've been taking the expired notices to the outhouse for personal use." He went even redder. "Using official government documents as toilet paper. These were the people running the empire." The clerk at the notice board got angry and raised his wooden staff at me, but the new gate captain grabbed him and whispered urgently, "That's the man who killed the previous captain." The clerk's face went white and his hands started shaking. He stammered that I needed to register at the governor's office. I asked a simple question. Did the governor want just the bandit chief's head, or the entire gang wiped out? Because the posted reward of 1,000 taels was barely enough to cover supplies for a small operation, let alone recruiting and equipping men for a full assault. The clerk stared at me like I was insane. Nobody haggled with the government over bounty prices. "Take me to the governor. I have conditions to discuss." The clerk and the new gate captain followed me, whispering to each other that I must be mentally ill. They figured the governor would throw me out on my face. The governor's office was on a main street, the kind of place ordinary people crossed to the other side to avoid. When I arrived, the governor was in the middle of hearing a case, a young woman accused of adultery and murdering her husband. He sentenced her to public parading through the streets, followed by immediate execution. I watched for just a moment and could tell she was innocent. The whole thing reeked of a setup, but I wasn't here for that, so I kept my mouth shut. After the case, the governor rubbed his tired eyes and asked what I wanted. The clerk explained I'd taken down the Flying Fire Mountain bounty notice. The governor waved dismissively. Plenty of people had accepted that bounty before. They all ended up dead. He didn't see why this required his attention. When the clerk mentioned I was demanding more money and wanted to negotiate conditions, the governor exploded. He ordered me beaten with 50 strikes and thrown out. Then I noticed the clerk's smug little grin and decided to play my card. "Governor, you knew that woman was framed. Why did you sentence her to death anyway?" The entire hall went silent. The governor froze, then slowly turned to face me. His eyes turned cold and dangerous. "Who gave you the courage to speak to me like this? I haven't even punished you yet for the gate incident, and you're finding fault with my judgments." He walked to his desk, leaned forward on both hands, and pointed at a sword hanging beside it, wrapped in yellow silk embroidered with a 9-clawed golden dragon. "See that? The emperor's own imperial sword, personally bestowed. I could kill you right now, and even old Ling Huzheng wouldn't dare say a word. This isn't Tianyong City. This is Yuzhou, and here, you're nothing." I smiled wide. What impressive authority. Truly worthy of the emperor's most trusted student. That kind of treatment would make most princes jealous. I almost felt intimidated just now. Almost. The emperor gave you that sword to govern Yuzhou, and tell right from wrong. Not to scare people, and certainly not to eliminate anyone who disagrees with you. I hit hard with those last words. Eliminate anyone who disagrees. I said it like that was exactly what he was doing right now. It cut straight through his authority and grabbed him by the throat. Governor Xia Lihong went still. He was the emperor's personally chosen man, sent to Yuzhou to build a loyal power base, while keeping a lid on rebel factions from Yinzhou and the barbarian threat from the north. That imperial sword wasn't really his. He was just the emperor's hand. A killing hand. My words had stirred something in him. When he'd first taken office, hadn't he wanted to be a good, fair official? But the emperor didn't want fairness. The emperor wanted stability and obedience. The woman's case proved it. He knew she was innocent, or at least not guilty of murder. She'd been desperately poor, with 4 children. She may have committed adultery for survival. 2 grain buns could mean the difference between life and death. But a woman that destitute couldn't afford poison. And if she'd truly planned murder, she would have been prepared to die when caught, not screaming about being framed and cursing the court. He chose to execute her anyway because showing mercy would invite every petty dispute in the city to his desk. He'd lose his authority and never have time for the emperor's real business. He didn't answer my challenge directly. Instead, he asked how I'd spotted the injustice. I laid it out plainly. The woman was half-starved, covered in bruises, wearing rags. She only fought back when sentenced to death. That's not the behavior of someone who planned a murder. A real killer would have accepted death calmly. And where would a woman that poor get poison? The whole thing was obviously a setup. He nodded slowly. My analysis matched his own and went further. Something shifted in his expression. He waved for a chair to be brought for me. I hear you want to eliminate the flying Fire Mountain bandits. How much? 1,500 taels at minimum. They've got over 1,000 fighters up there. He drummed his fingers on the desk. Money can be discussed. But what guarantees can you offer? I grinned. Every bandit gang around Tianyong City, dozens of them, wiped out. All by me. Send someone to check the records if you don't believe it. 1,500 is a lot. What are your other conditions? Permission to recruit 2,000 soldiers here in Yuzhou City. The silver goes toward recruitment and equipment, not my pocket. And I'll be pulling from the city's drifters, laborers, and troublemakers. Once I'm done, you'll have 2,000 fewer vagrants causing problems on your streets. Everybody wins. He laughed. You're quite the talker. You didn't mention keeping the silver at all. I have my condition. Now you have yours. He leaned forward. The flying Fire Mountain bandits have stockpiled stolen government supplies, gold, and silver. When you take their base, all of that comes back to the governor's office. Done, I said without hesitation. My goal was clear. I didn't care about whatever treasure the flying Fire Mountain bandits had hoarded. Let the governor have all of it. What I wanted was the right to recruit 2,000 soldiers, and this bandit suppression mission was my ticket. Governor Xia Lihong was curious to see how I'd turn a mob of drifters and street thugs into a fighting force capable of taking down a well-trained bandit army of over 1,000. He signed off on my recruitment notice and had his clerks posted across the city. The terms I wrote were designed to attract exactly the kind of men I wanted. Anyone who enlisted got 1 dan of grain rice immediately. Enough to feed a family of 3 for a very long time, when most people survived on wild vegetables. For the homeless drifters and thugs with no families, that grain could be sold for cash. On top of that, every enemy killed in battle earned a reward, verified by bringing back the dead enemy's thumb rather than an entire head. Simpler to carry, harder to fake. Xia Lihong read through my notice carefully and was impressed. He asked if I worried about soldiers killing each other for thumbs. I told him no. Smart fighters would focus on killing enemies, while keeping an eye on fallen comrades whose trophies were up for grabs. And military discipline would handle anyone who stepped out of line. He also noticed that most of the recruits would be loners without families, meaning I'd barely have to pay out the settlement grain. He called me shrewd. He was right. I had my own calculations that I kept to myself. These 2,000 raw recruits would take heavy casualties against the bandits. That was expected, even planned for. The ones who survived would be battle-tested, hardened, and proven. Those were the men I'd bring back to Siwa village and absorb into the Howling Tiger Army. Anyone who turned out to be a spy planted by the governor or otherwise unreliable would simply be executed for some military infraction. Out of 2,000, I expected maybe 600 or 700 to make the final cut. Before leaving, I asked the governor for someone who knew the Flying Fire Mountain terrain. He assigned a clerk who'd participated in a previous failed expedition against those bandits. This man knew the mountain paths and layout. I stopped by the Tingyu Pavilion to put Wu Santong in charge of both the treasure appraisal and processing the incoming recruits, then headed out of the city with Da Zhuang and the clerk to scout the target. The clerk, walking ahead leading my horse, asked shyly if he could join the actual assault. The bounty terms were too tempting. A few enemy thumbs meant real silver. I looked at his scrawny frame and shook my head. He'd get himself killed. He smiled awkwardly, but I could tell he was already scheming to sneak into the ranks. With 2,000 men, he figured I couldn't check every face. After about 2 hours of riding, we finally saw Flying Fire Mountain in the distance. Yuzhou City was surrounded by mountains with very few towns or villages outside the walls. That meant the bandits up there had only one target: merchant caravans and government supply convoys passing along the mountain roads below. From what the clerk told me, the bandits on Flying Fire Mountain had started as several separate gangs, but over time they'd all been absorbed into one force under a single leader, now over 1,000 strong. The terrain was terrifying. The mountain shot up like an ancient volcano, sheer cliffs on every side. Only one path led to the top. The bandits had posted sentries everywhere, including hidden ones that were nearly impossible to spot. Their main camp sat on a high platform behind a massive boulder called General's Ridge that stood on the mountain's edge like a stone warrior. I rode to the base of the cliffs and looked up. A small river ran along the bottom with a narrow riverbank, the only flat ground around. The whole landscape looked like a giant sword had split the earth in two, with the mountain on one side and this gap in the middle. The rock formations were layered and regular, and the stone outcroppings along the cliff face were loose, almost deliberately so, making climbing nearly suicidal. A frontal assault up the only path would be mass suicide no matter how many men I threw at it. But studying those layered rocks gave me an idea. I didn't need to go up. I could bring the mountain down, flatten it. With enough gunpowder placed at the right structural points, I could collapse the whole thing. On the ride back, I asked the clerk about the bandit leader. He got excited. Apparently a storyteller in the city had turned her into a legend. Her name was Lin Zi. According to the tale, she'd been abused by a man, fled to the mountains, and charmed the original bandit chief into making her his woman. The chief died, in the arms of pleasure, and she took over. Then she seduced every neighboring bandit leader into merging with her gang. Those who joined got a night with her. The man who'd originally abused her was supposedly dragged up the mountain and executed by 1,000 cuts. The clerk told all this like it was gospel truth. I pointed out he'd gotten it from a storyteller, someone paid to make things dramatic. Still, a woman who could unify all the bandit gangs and hold off government armies was no ordinary person. The storyteller angle gave me another idea entirely. In a world starved for entertainment, these traveling speakers had massive reach among common people. If I organized a team of them and fed them specific narratives, I could shape public opinion however I wanted. A propaganda unit. Something to think about for later. We got back to Yuzhou City just before the gates closed for the night. Lu Yin had a room ready at the inn. I slept early. The next morning, Lu Yin took very good care of waking me up. She was the type who'd push through exhaustion without complaining, then burrow into my arms and fall asleep instantly the moment we were done. For her, that was pure happiness. Around noon, Wu Santong knocked on my door with the final numbers. The Tingyu Pavilion had worked through the night to finish appraising everything. They'd purchased the most valuable pieces outright for 5,000 taels. The remaining goods were estimated at around 15,000 taels, and buyers had already been found. With the auction house's connections, the final price would likely climb higher. The total haul was going to be substantial, enough to fund the army expansion and keep things running for a while. At the Fulai Inn, Wu Santong reported that recruitment was going well. Over 600 men had signed up already, and more were still coming. I had him exchange some of the silver into smaller coins. Then we bought supplies before heading to the staging area near the city gate, where the governor had let me set up camp. The place was packed. Recruits filled the small clearing, and more drifters and thugs were squatting around the edges, watching each other with hostile eyes. Most had brought their own weapons, small knives, hatchets, whatever they had. The moment I showed up, a local thug stood and spat on the ground. He swaggered over with 3 of his boys, waving a knife in my face and demanding the grain I'd promised in the recruitment notice. He wanted it right now, or he'd cut me. I'd expected this. Some of these men had no intention of fighting. They just wanted to grab the grain and disappear. I told him plainly that nobody got grain until we marched. If I handed it out now, half the camp would vanish overnight. He didn't like that answer. He pulled a blade, about 8 inches long, and lunged at my stomach. Dazhuang's eyes went cold behind me. He'd been eating well for 2 days and was ready to tear someone apart to protect me. But I raised my hand to stop him. I caught the thug's wrist mid-thrust, snapped it with a single twist, and his knife clattered to the ground. Then I flicked the fallen blade up with my foot and sent it spinning into his throat. Blood sprayed. He was dead before he hit the dirt. Dazhuang stared at me with his mouth open. He'd just realized his new master was deadlier than he was. He was probably wondering why I even needed a bodyguard. The thug's 3 followers screamed and bolted. I turned to face the crowd of over 1,000 men, still smiling casually. Anyone else have a problem with my orders? If you want to outsmart me, check your intelligence first. If you want to outfight me, check how hard your bones are. If you came here just to steal grain, leave now. Stay, and you follow my rules. Break them, and you end up like him. Everyone stared at the still warm body. After a long silence, one man left. Then another. About 200 trickled away. Around 700 remained. Some were vicious, hard eyes, scarred hands, dangerous men. Those were the ones I wanted most. A fierce soldier just needs a strong leader. Others were ordinary, poor people clutching farming tools, driven here by hunger. Their eyes were calm but determined. Feed them, clothe them, and they'd be loyal forever. I didn't have time for sympathy right now. Loyalty would be earned in battle. Only those who survived the assault on Flying Fire Mountain would qualify for the Howling Tiger Army. Good. Since you stayed, from now on you're my brothers. Follow me. I led them to the market where we met Wu Santong with the exchanged silver. I bought what I needed, clay pots, jars, and fire oil. Not conventional weapons. Then I marched the whole group out of the city toward the riverbank below Flying Fire Mountain. More stragglers joined along the way, bringing the total to about 700. I looked at them and grinned. This would be enough for tonight's work. Wu Santong would handle the rest of the recruiting and send reinforcements later. 2 hours later, I had everyone at the base of Flying Fire Mountain. I split them into 2 groups, one to chop trees from the surrounding forest, the other to build fires against the cliff face. Wu Santong didn't understand. The bandits were at the top. What good was fire at the bottom? I just laughed. The principle was ancient. Heat the rock with fire, then let the freezing winter night cool it rapidly. Thermal expansion and contraction. The legendary engineer Du used this method to split mountains for flood control thousands of years ago, and winter made it even more effective. The bandits' camp sat on stone outcroppings extending from the cliff face. If I could crack those rock formations, their entire fortress would come crashing down. After my display at the city gate, killing that thug without blinking, these recruits worked fast. Within half an hour, the base of the mountain was piled with firewood and blazing. I left a few men to keep the fires going and pulled everyone else back. By the second day, my force had grown to over 1,000. I spread them around the mountain in hidden positions. On the third day, Wu Santong arrived with the rest. 2,000 men total, recruited in just 3 days. Before leaving the city, I'd kept my promise. Every man's grain allotment was delivered to their families. For the loners, I had it sent to their homes. Once their families had the grain, these men had no reason to desert. As darkness fell, the massive fires at the base became impossible to ignore from above. The bandits finally noticed something was wrong. I heard voices drifting down, confused, then angry. I'd already posted men along the only path down the mountain. Anyone who came to investigate walked straight into an ambush. The first group, 7 men, came down to check. A few muffled screams, then silence. My men stripped their weapons, cut their thumbs for the bounty count, and dragged the bodies away. No casualties on our side. This was the beauty of my plan. The bandits would keep sending scouts, and each group would disappear. Meanwhile, the fires kept heating the rock. Once the stone was hot enough, I'd douse the flames and let the freezing night air do its work. The rapid temperature change would crack the cliff face. The mountain wouldn't need to be climbed. It would collapse on its own. I'd also found a secondary route up during my earlier scouting, steep and dangerous, with a few sheer sections that would need to be carved, but passable. The bandits had never used it, so there were no guards. If the thermal cracking didn't bring down enough of the mountain, I'd send men up that way. About an hour later, the bandits sent a bigger group, 60 men this time. My recruits swarmed them. It was messy, eh? We lost about 20 of our own, but all 60 bandits were killed. Not a single one escaped back up. I'd expected casualties. War isn't clean, and squeamishness has no place in command. What mattered was that my royal recruits were learning to fight together through real combat. After 2 successful ambushes, they were starting to coordinate, and their morale was soaring. Nothing builds a soldier faster than winning. Wu Santong arrived with over 2,000 portions of bean porridge, pre-ordered from that little tavern by the city wall. It was perfect campaign food, wrapped in oil paper, easy to carry, filling enough to last. Wu Santong warned me that the bandit leader wasn't stupid. After losing 2 groups without any returning, she'd figure out there was an ambush below. With enough rope, her people could rappel down the cliff at hidden spots and hit us from unexpected angles. I told him not to worry. Whatever she could think of, I'd already thought of too. We'd adapt as needed. Then came a problem I hadn't expected. Fire oil started pouring down from above, cascading over the cliff face toward our hiding positions. Those bandits were rich. They had enough oil to drench an entire mountainside. Their plan was obvious. Light up the whole area, flush us out of hiding, then pick us off with arrows from the high ground. I had to admit, the bandit leader was sharp. But terrain worked both ways. The fire oil couldn't reach under General's Ridge. The massive outcropping jutted out too far. I ordered all 2,000 men to pull back along the cliff face to that sheltered zone. Let the oil burn itself out. We could just move to another position. The fire raged for hours. The bandits couldn't see anyone below and got frustrated, blind firing arrows into the riverbed. The shafts clattered uselessly against the stones. I couldn't help laughing at their impotent rage. Wu Santong asked what our next move was. I told him it was time to sleep. We'd rotate watch shifts and keep the base fires burning all night. By morning, things would be very different. The heat from the fires and burning oil actually kept us warm. The only discomfort was sleeping on jagged rocks. By the time the oil burned out in the small hours, our men had been feeding the base fires non-stop, keeping the cliff face roasting. At dawn, I spotted 3 scouts scrambling up the cliff to report to the camp. I immediately sent Wu Santong with 800 men to block the mountain path. His only job, kill anyone coming down, let nobody through. Then I went to the cliff face and held out my hand. Even from a distance, the deep heat radiating from the stone was intense. 2 days and nights of continuous fire had done their job. But I couldn't wait for natural cooling now. How are those wooden buckets coming? We hollowed out about 800, sir. And the water channel. Water started flowing in the middle of the night. Perfect. I split my remaining 1,000+ men into relay teams and ordered them to start pouring water onto the superheated rock face without stopping. I looked up at the magnificent General's Ridge one last time. It was beautiful, that stone warrior silhouette against the sky. A shame to destroy it. The first buckets hit the rock with violent hissing. White steam exploded upward. After a few hundred buckets, the men noticed cracks appearing in the stone, spreading visibly. Small pieces began falling. They ran for cover. The cracks raced upward, linking with fractures already formed by the freezing night air hitting the fire-heated upper sections. The entire cliff face was groaning. Then came the sound, a deep, rolling thunder from inside the mountain. Rocks started falling from the upper walls, slowly at first, then in torrents. I shouted for everyone to get to safety. We sprinted to cover just in time. Behind us, the world came apart. The lower cliff shattered first, then the massive General's Ridge above it cracked and broke into pieces. The whole formation came crashing down. Boulders, buildings, people, everything that had been perched on those stone outcroppings tumbled into the riverbed and smashed to dust. Half of General's Ridge was gone. The bandits' fortress, their impregnable natural stronghold, had literally fallen out from under them. Bodies rained down with the rubble. It was horrifying and magnificent at the same time. The surviving bandits panicked completely. Some screamed and fled in every direction. Some grabbed weapons and charged downhill in desperation. But the mountain path was treacherous even on a calm day. In their panic, many stumbled and fell to their deaths. The ones who made it down ran straight into Wu Santong's 800 men blocking the trail at the mid-mountain platform. I raised my sword and shouted, "Flying Fire Mountain is finished. General's Ridge has fallen. Everyone charge. Kill them all." The bandits came charging down the mountain straight into Wu Santong's men, who'd rested all night and were fresh and hungry for the fight. My recruits were street thugs, drifters, and desperate poor, every one of them fighting for silver bounties and a chance at a real life. They weren't going to back down. The clash was brutal. My men had worse weapons and no training, and that showed fast. The bandits kept pushing down from above, tearing holes in our line. But we had numbers, and every gap got filled almost immediately. The fighting spread across the mid-mountain platform in a fan shape, which actually played to our advantage. More of my men could engage at once. Wu Santong was nervous beside me, watching the carnage. His escort company fighters were itching to join. They were real combat veterans, far better than either the bandits or my raw recruits. But I held them back. "Relax," I said. "Give it half an hour. They'll break." The math was simple. The bandits had lost hundreds already, from the cliff collapse, from falling, from our ambushes. They were down to maybe 900. My side had more men and higher morale. Every minute that passed, the gap widened. The bandits were fighting to escape. My men were fighting for money. Desperation fades. Greed doesn't. When General's Ridge collapsed, most of the bandit leadership had been up there. The best spots went to the top bosses. That's just how bandits think. So their command structure was probably shattered. Maybe even the leader Lin Zi was buried under the rubble. I sent the water-carrying teams in as reinforcements. Fresh legs, fresh anger. Then I mounted Wu Zhuai, loaded my heavy crossbow, and started picking off any bandit who looked like they were giving orders. The first bolt punched clean through a big man's chest and sent him flying backward several meters. The crossbow was clumsy on horseback, too heavy to reload easily, but that wasn't the point. I needed the bandits to see me. Every time I raised the weapon, every one of them knew the next bolt could have their name on it. It was psychological warfare. After the second shot, small groups started breaking away, looking for cover behind rocks instead of fighting. One man retreating created a weak spot. My recruits poured through like water. The fan-shaped battle line started closing into a half circle, then tightened further, squeezing the remaining bandits together on the narrow platform. The fighting got ugly. The platform was so crowded that people from both sides were getting pushed off the cliff edges. Weapons broke, and my men grabbed fallen enemy blades or just tackled bandits barehanded, wrestling away their swords before killing them. Wu Santong finally exhaled when he saw the bandits starting to scatter for real. "They're breaking." I counted roughly 600 or 700 of my men still on their feet. Costly, but this was always the plan: forge soldiers through real combat. The survivors would be battle-hardened and worthy of the Howling Tiger Army. Then I spotted something that made me shake my head. That skinny clerk from the governor's office, the one I'd told was too scrawny to fight, had snuck into the ranks with the new recruits, thinking I wouldn't notice in a crowd of 2,000. I'd found him and pulled him out. Since the clerk had snuck along anyway, I put him to use. I sent him back to the city to report to Governor Xia that Flying Fire Mountain was taken and he could come collect whatever was left of his stolen government supplies. About 15 minutes later, the battle was completely over. I climbed up with Da Zhuang to survey the mountain. The top platform was massive, several football fields wide. Even with General's Ridge collapsed, there was plenty of flat ground left. But all the important buildings and storage had been concentrated on the ridge itself, and everything up there was now smashed to pieces at the bottom of the riverbed. That meant whatever the governor wanted recovered was buried under tons of rubble on the riverbank. Not my problem. I'd promised to eliminate the bandits, not deliver their stolen goods in perfect condition. I searched for the bandit leader Lin Zi and the other chiefs. Not a single one was found alive. They'd probably all been on General's Ridge when it came down. I didn't waste time looking further. I had my men carry down everything salvageable and pile it on the riverbank. Then came the count. 648 of my recruits survived, better than I'd expected. Roughly half were the street thugs, half were the honest common folk. Next was payday. I'd prepared the loose silver in advance. The 3 top earners had each collected over 10 taels worth of thumbs. All 3 were gang leaders who'd pooled their crew's trophies together to claim bigger payouts, then split it among their boys afterward. I noticed but said nothing. They'd risked their lives. They earned it. For the ordinary people, the earnings were smaller. Most had just a few coins worth. Some had barely anything. I paid every single person down to the last copper, and when someone's count came up short of a fair amount, I rounded up. These were poor folk who'd put their lives on the line. I wouldn't shortchange them. While handing out rewards, I whispered something to each of the honest farmers and laborers. Almost none of them left afterward. They stood quietly waiting. When everything was settled, about 400 people remained. I told them that staying meant they were coming with me to Zenhidu. Anyone with families should register with Wu Santong. Their relatives would be transported tomorrow. The moment I mentioned Zenhidu, a bunch of the remaining thugs slipped away. A remote border settlement? No thanks. They'd rather hustle for scraps in the big city. I smiled watching them go. That was exactly the filtering I wanted. Before long, Governor Xia Lihong arrived with a full entourage. When he saw the piles of bodies and the shattered remains of what had been an impregnable fortress, his jaw nearly hit the ground. Truly worthy of the man who defeated the northern barbarians. I'm impressed. He bowed to me respectfully. He'd finally looked into my background after our meeting, and apparently what he found had startled him badly. He walked to the cliff edge and stared at the destruction. His clerk had reported that I'd burned fires for 2 days and nights, and then General's Ridge simply collapsed. The clerk hadn't seen the water-pouring phase, so the governor had no idea how it actually worked. He was half convinced I was some kind of mystic who'd predicted the collapse and just stood around making fires for show. He asked me directly how I'd brought down a landmark that had stood for centuries. Simple. Thermal expansion and contraction. Heat the rock with fire, then douse it with cold water. The internal stress cracks the stone apart. The foundation breaks, and the whole thing comes down. He stared at me blankly. He'd never heard of such a thing. I just smiled. Some knowledge was worth more than any army. I didn't mind explaining the thermal expansion principle to Governor Xia. This kind of knowledge spreading was a good thing. He kept repeating thermal expansion and contraction to himself, but couldn't quite grasp it. He asked why mountains don't collapse naturally through hot summers and cold winters. I just smiled and told him some things require practice to understand. He got the hint and stopped asking, then went off to direct his men to dig through the rubble for salvageable government property. What I didn't know at the time was that they never found Lin Zi's body among the debris. I'd already left that cleanup entirely to the governor. Wu Santong headed back to the village first with my command token to mobilize 300 Howling Tiger soldiers as escorts for the new recruits' families. Siwa village was full, but Shango village had plenty of empty houses. Over 300 new households meant a huge population boost for Zenhidu. I didn't give anything away for free, though. Families who owned property in Yuzhou could trade for equivalent housing. Those with nothing started in grass shelters and earned proper homes through labor or military merit. Free handouts breed entitlement. People only value what they work for. This policy was well received, and the new recruits threw themselves into both training and construction with real enthusiasm. Lu Yin and I stayed one more night at the Fulai Inn. I was about to leave when Zhou Wanggui showed up at my door. He'd gone to the governor's office first to apologize for the gate incident, only to find Xia Lihong had already dismissed the whole thing. Killing the gate captain? After wiping out Flying Fire Mountain in 3 days with a mob of street thugs, that was nothing. The moment Zhou Wanggui walked in, Dazhuang grabbed him. I looked down at his boots and spotted white crystals. Commissioner Zhou, is that salt on your shoes? Carrying government salt outside official channels is a serious crime. He panicked and started brushing off his boots before realizing I was half joking. He'd just come from inspecting the salt fields. Of course he'd have salt on him. But my mind was already racing. Salt fields near Yuzhou City. Salt production meant a reliable source of saltpeter, far more efficient than my horse manure operation back home. If I could get control of those salt fields along with the iron mine, I'd hold 2 of Yuzhou's most critical economic resources. I asked him directly whether the salt field was under his jurisdiction. His teacup froze halfway to his mouth. His face changed immediately. Mr. Liu, don't even think about the salt fields. The people behind them. Even with your military achievements, you can't afford to cross them. That only made me more curious. He explained that unlike iron mines, which were mostly government-owned, 70% of the empire's salt production was controlled by private salt merchants. The government only had oversight authority, not ownership. These merchants had enormous wealth and powerful backers at the highest levels of the imperial court. So the salt fields weren't just a resource, they were a political minefield. But that had never stopped me before. Zhou Wangui warned me that the salt merchants were some of the most powerful people in the empire. Many had connections stretching back to the founding of the dynasty, with fortunes rivaling the national treasury itself. Then he dropped something that made my ears perk up. The owner of the local salt field wasn't primarily a salt trader. They were in the medicine business. The Taiha Medicine Bureau. Of course it was them. The same people my father-in-law had told me about. The ones buying up every herb in the country at inflated prices, shutting down independent pharmacies, and profiting off wartime suffering. I'd already ordered Wu Jiang to inspect their ships at the water fort. Now I learned they also controlled salt production, one of the most profitable industries in the empire. I'd underestimated them. Good thing I hadn't moved against them yet. Zhou told me the Taiha Bureau was small in name, but enormously powerful, highly organized, ruthless in its methods, and extremely secretive about who was really behind it. Even he, a salt and iron commissioner, claimed not to know, or rather, couldn't say. I asked him about getting a salt merchant license for myself. He raised an eyebrow. Having the iron mine wasn't enough for me. Now I wanted salt too? He said the license itself wasn't difficult, but without an actual salt field, it was useless. Any new deposits discovered would be snatched up immediately by established players. I smiled and told him I'd find my own way. Yuzhou was a big place. If one salt deposit existed here, there had to be others. Mountain salt, rock salt, something. I just needed people searching the right mountains. What I needed from Zhou right now was the official credential, a legitimate identity that would let me compete with the Taiha Bureau on legal footing. My long-term thinking was clear. As my army grew, salt and medicine would become critical strategic resources. If I didn't secure my own supply, the Taiha Bureau would choke me eventually. Better to strike first, get the credentials now, find the resources later, then cut them off at the knees. I gave Zhou 300 taels to grease whatever wheels needed greasing. I didn't care if he kept some for himself, as long as the paperwork came through. I stayed another night. The next morning, Luyan was taking care of me when Zhou showed up at the crack of dawn. He could wait. 2 hours later, I finally got dressed and came out. Zhou had the license ready. He took me to the Salt and Iron Bureau to sign the official documents and receive my merchant credentials. The process went smoothly because the empire actively encouraged merchants to prospect for new salt deposits in the mountains. The government couldn't afford to rely on imports from neighboring countries. If war broke out and salt supplies were cut, the military would collapse. No salt meant no strength for soldiers or war horses. Salt merchants paid 40% of their revenue in taxes, making salt one of the empire's biggest income sources. The government set base prices to keep salt affordable for common people, so individual profit margins were thin. But the sheer volume of demand meant salt merchants were consistently among the wealthiest people in the country. Some were powerful enough to influence the appointment of local officials. I now had my salt merchant credential. The next step was finding my own deposit and building an operation that could challenge the Taiha Bureau directly. Salt in this era was essentially liquid gold. If one person monopolized it, they'd be richer than the emperor himself. Now I understood why the Taiha Medicine Bureau wasn't just in the herb business. They'd branched into salt too. Both products were bulk purchased by the government and consumed by every household in the empire. The easiest money to make was always the government's money. Salt came in 3 grades. The finest, pure white, finely ground, was reserved for the nobility. Second grade went to wealthy families. Common people got the cheapest rough salt with grit and dirt mixed in. Even that was expensive, over 2 taels of silver per dan. Without government price controls, ordinary folk couldn't afford salt at all. The paperwork for my salt merchant license took less than an hour. As a new merchant, my authorization was limited to selling within Yuzhou only, capped at 3,000 dan per month across all grades. Selling outside the province meant smuggling charges, license revoked, assets seized, sentenced to hard labor. Instead of heading straight home, I told Wu Santong to take me to the salt field. I needed to see the operation firsthand. Chun Bai led the 300 Howling Tiger soldiers to escort the new recruits' families back to Zenhidu while I rode off with Wu Santong, a few escort guards, and Lu Yin. The salt field was less than an hour's ride from Yuzhou City. The entire mountainside had been carved into broad terraced platforms for evaporating brine. Salt came from 2 sources here: crushed and refined rock salt, and underground brine water that was boiled down, treated, and sun-dried into crude salt. Peak production season was April and May when winds were steady and the sun was strong, but workers were already busy. The process was straightforward. After drying, the top layer was scraped off. It collected dust and impurities. Beneath that lay the purest white crystal salt. Below the fine salt came the second grade. The bottom layer, mixed with dirt and coarse granules, became the cheap rough salt for common people. This was the operation I needed to understand if I was going to challenge the Taiha Bureau. Breaking their salt monopoly started here. As a small-time merchant, I could only buy rough salt from these fields. The fine grades were kept by the field owners for premium sales. They controlled supply deliberately. Even if they could produce more fine salt, they wouldn't. Scarcity kept prices high. That was basic business. The field manager spoke to me like I was beneath him. To these people, a new merchant with no salt field of his own was just a bottom feeder picking up scraps. "This is standard rough salt," he said with an air of superiority. 1.5 taels per dan. Our best seller. I nodded and kept looking around, memorizing everything. The layout, the process, the volumes, the logistics. I wasn't here to buy salt today. I was here to learn how to build my own operation and eventually cut the Taiha Bureau off at the source. The prices at the salt field were outrageous. 1.5 taels per dan for the lowest grade rough salt. Add the 40% tax, transportation costs, and labor for selling. By the time it reached customers at the government's minimum price, there was barely any profit. And the quality was terrible. I grabbed a handful, and it was full of grit and dirt. I tried to haggle. "This stuff looks like livestock feed, not human food." The manager laughed in my face. "In this world, people aren't much different from livestock. You think having a merchant license makes you some kind of savior? Just surviving is good enough?" I asked what the price would be if I bought the entire mountain stock. He stopped laughing. For orders over 2,000 dan, the price dropped to 1.4 of a tael. I did the math. I could spare about 3,000 taels from my funds. The rest had to keep feeding 1,500 soldiers and all the people back at Xinhidu. Mu Wanqing was already counting every coin in the ledgers to keep us afloat. Now I truly understood why every warlord in history was constantly desperate for money. Armies are expensive. "I'll take 2,500 dan." The manager's jaw dropped. That was over 3,000 taels of silver from a brand new merchant nobody had heard of. He went from looking down at me to practically bowing, calling me boss, and rushing to draw up the contract. His excitement made sense. This single purchase equaled their entire annual rough salt output. The salt field had over 2,000 dan sitting unsold in storage, and their owner had been worried about moving it. I was the perfect buyer. Wu Santong couldn't figure out my plan. "This much salt will take forever to sell. The profit margins are terrible. You'd make more money hunting." I smiled. He was thinking like an ordinary merchant. The real money in salt wasn't in selling rough salt as is. It was in refining it. Every salt merchant, even the small ones, did some level of secondary processing to extract finer grades from the crude stuff. The salt field operators deliberately kept their own refining limited to maintain artificial scarcity of fine salt and keep prices high. But I had knowledge from a future era. I could take this mountain of cheap rough salt home and process it into 4 distinct grades using techniques nobody in this world had ever seen. The finest grade would rival anything the nobility ate. The second and third grades would dominate the market. Even the lowest leftovers could be sold as livestock feed. The crude salt that cost me 1.4 per dan would multiply in value many times over after my refining process. The profit potential was enormous, far beyond what anyone at this salt field could imagine. Wu Santong asked why the salt field owners didn't just refine everything into fine salt themselves and keep all the profit. I told him they weren't stupid, they controlled the supply deliberately. Flooding the market with fine salt would crash the price. Their business model depended on scarcity, but my business model would be different. I wasn't trying to sell luxury salt to nobles. I was building a war economy. Salt for my soldiers, salt for my horses, salt to trade for other resources, and refined salt to sell at premium prices to fund my army's expansion. Every dan I processed was strategic advantage. We loaded the 2,500 dan onto hired ox carts and merged with the Howling Tiger soldiers escorting the new families. The whole caravan headed back to Siwa village. Wu Santong kept worrying about the money I'd spent on salt. I told him the processing and selling would take about 3 months total. He calmed down a little. Then I told him the actual selling part would take just 10 days. He nearly fell off his horse. 10 days to move 2,500 dan of salt and turn a profit. For 100 taels a day. That wasn't commerce. That was robbery. I explained my plan. This batch was just a test run. Once I processed it back home, he'd take the escort company to every salt field in Yuzhou and buy up all the rough salt he could find. The only limit on my earnings was how much crude salt they could produce. The secret was simple. Every salt maker in this era relied on sun-drying and basic boiling. Their fine salt still tasted bitter because they couldn't remove the magnesium and other mineral impurities. But I knew techniques from my previous life: charcoal filtering, soybean milk clarification, alkaline precipitation. I could produce salt so pure and white that nothing in this world could compare. Once my product hit the market, every other salt would become obsolete. On the road home, the convoy was painfully slow. Chun Bai was doing his best commanding the column, but hundreds of families with children and elderly, plus household belongings, plus dozens of salt carts. It was chaos. We'd barely covered a third of the distance and already stopped 3 times. At this pace, we wouldn't even find a campsite before dark. The full journey normally took 3 days of forced march. I decided to split up. Chun Bai would keep the 300 Howling Tiger soldiers with the families and their belongings. I'd take the salt carts ahead with just Wu Santong, the escort guards, Da Zhuang, and Lu Yin, 9 people total. Chun Bai offered 100 soldiers as escort, but I refused. He needed every man for the families. I wasn't worried about bandits. That turned out to be a mistake. We hadn't noticed that a group had been trailing us since we left the city, staying off the road and hiding in the tree line, keeping 20 miles back. After our convoy split, the sounds came, rustling from all sides. 60 or 70 armed fighters stepped out of the woods. The leader was a woman, tall, maybe 5'7", with a powerful build and a sword at her hip. Around 40 years old, but well-preserved. I pulled my reins and smiled. So that's why they never found her body in the rubble. You're Lin Zi. Damn right I am. You're the little brat who destroyed my flying fire mountain. Her hand was already on her sword hilt. She had the bearing of a warrior, but honestly, she probably wasn't as skilled as Wu Xianyue in a real fight. Lin Zi called me a kid who hadn't even grown hair yet. I almost dropped my pants to prove her wrong, but I held back. I tried reasoning with her. You're alive. That's what matters. I only took your stuff to trade for silver. You can rebuild. But if you died under those rocks, it would have been over for good. So I'd suggest you back off before this gets ugly. She didn't appreciate my logic. She offered me a deal, become her captive husband, and she'd let me go. I laughed. She snapped that she was joking, and I'd never get the chance. I made it worse. Even if you stripped down right now, I wouldn't touch you. Too old for my taste. That was the worst thing I could have said to a woman. Her face twisted with rage. On top of the fury over her destroyed mountain and dead followers, my insult was the final spark. Kill him. Whoever takes his head gets to spend tonight with me. 70 or 80 bandits charged from all directions. I had 8 fighters, Wu Santong, his escort guards, and Da Zhuang. Lu Yin and the cart drivers were useless in combat. I handed Da Zhuang my straight saber, Zhang Tiechu's masterwork, the sharpest blade in the world next to my curved sword. His hands trembled. First time facing real combat. I told him it was normal to be nervous. Just start swinging and the fear would fade. Then I decided to show him how it was done. I drew my curved sword and stepped into the mob of bandits. They all targeted me instead of Da Zhuang. I looked less threatening than the giant, and killing me meant a night with their boss. Big mistake. My curved blade went through them like cutting grass. Each swing opened a body before the victim even realized what happened. Their strength just drained away mid-swing. Men dropped around each other so fast their comrades couldn't process it. Wu Santong's escort fighters formed up around the salt carts in full armor with spears, swords, and hidden boot knives. With their experience and equipment, a handful of bandits was nothing. Lin Zi saw her people falling and charged me herself, bringing a heavy blade down at my face. I deflected it casually with an upward flick. The collision sheared her sword in half. Before she could react, my blade had already grazed the top of her head. She felt a chill, then warmth as blood ran down her face. She reached up and realized her entire scalp had been sliced off. While she stood there stunned, I'd already turned away. She felt a tightness in her chest and looked down, A hole had appeared. She hadn't even seen the thrust. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her vision went black and she collapsed. The whole fight took about 15 minutes. Every single bandit was killed. On our side, 0 combat casualties. 2 cart drivers died, but that was their own fault. Wu Santong had told everyone to stay on the carts and not move. They panicked and tried to run, which made them targets. Dazhuang watched everything with wide eyes. Now he'd seen exactly what kind of master he served. Dazhuang took 3 knife wounds in the fight, his first real combat. Nothing serious, just surface cuts, but I didn't blame him. He had the strength of an ox, but 0 experience. He'd learn. Shunbai arrived with the main column after the fighting was over. His scouts had heard the sounds of battle ahead, and he'd rushed forward to help. I sent Dazhuang ahead on horseback to the nearest station for medical treatment, then continued with the salt carts. We reached Siwa village by nightfall the next day. Dozens of carts loaded with salt, far too much to store at home. I needed a secure place to refine it, and after thinking it through, I chose Lu Lang's tribal territory. It was the safest spot I had. The tribespeople couldn't leak secrets even if they wanted to. The language barrier alone made that impossible. And in their minds, I was their god. They'd die before betraying me. On top of that, they desperately needed salt themselves. They'd been scraping mineral dust from rocks and drinking animal blood for their salt intake. Give them a salt operation to protect, and they'd guard it with their lives. Plus, their women could handle the labor-intensive filtering and refining work without pulling anyone away from other tasks. The refining process itself was too simple to risk exposing to outsiders. Unlike crossbow manufacturing, which I decided to share, salt purification could be learned just by watching once. Filter out impurities, strain repeatedly, dry it. Pure, white fine salt. I couldn't let that knowledge spread. Chunbai brought the families in around midnight. I temporarily housed everyone in the horse ranch and warehouses. They'd get land assignments tomorrow and start building their own homes. Late that night, I visited Juzi at his carpentry workshop. I'd promised Wu Jiang 4 heavy crossbows for the water fort's defense, and I needed to check progress. After that, the priority was mass-producing crossbows for my new archer unit. The workshop was lit up despite the late hour. I spotted a young woman, round-faced, sturdy build, dark skin from outdoor work, bringing Juzi a bowl of hot porridge. This was the girl he'd been courting. She bowed shyly when she saw me. I asked her name. Xiaohua. She said life here was good, plenty to eat, warm clothes, comfortable living. I told Juzi to treat her well. He grinned and said he couldn't spoil her enough. I pressed a few taels of silver into his hand. Both he and Xiaohua refused at first. I insisted they'd need money eventually, especially if children came along. I told them that once the commercial district in Zenhidu was built, Xiaohua could run a small shop and Juzi could sell furniture on the side. If they ever needed startup money, they could draw a few taels from my wife's accounts. Juzi accepted gratefully and swore to work even harder. A few taels meant nothing to me. Right now I was personally funding the entire village's expenses. But once Zenhidu's commercial district was operational and people started businesses, I could establish a tax system. Revenue flowing in would fund the army, which would protect the commerce, which would generate more revenue. That's how you build real power. Not just military strength, but a self-sustaining economy. I sat down at Juzi's workbench and realized I was starving. I asked Xiaohua for a bowl of grain porridge and some pickled vegetables. She was surprised. She didn't think someone like me would eat such simple food. I told her I came from hard times too. Juzi reported that the 4 heavy crossbows for Wu Zhang's water fort were already finished and delivered. Then he pulled out something that really caught my attention, a prototype light crossbow built from my blueprints. I'd given him 2 designs, this light version for cavalry use, and a heavy armor-piercing model for infantry. The light crossbow was exactly what I needed. It could be loaded one-handed on horseback, which was critical for mounted combat. I designed it to match the barbarian horse archer's capability, but with far less training time. Teaching someone to shoot a bow from horseback takes years. A crossbow takes weeks. And once I eventually developed firearms, these same riders would transition into dragoons carrying guns. I tested it by shooting a sharpened wooden stick at the courtyard wall. It punched into the clay with a solid thud. Not as deep as an iron-tipped bolt would go, but even with wood, it could pierce leather armor. With proper iron arrowheads, No cavalry rider could survive a hit at close range. Zhuzi confirmed his tests showed lethal effectiveness within 50 paces. The construction used layered composite wood strips instead of single pieces, stronger, lighter, faster to build, and less picky about materials. I told him to prioritize making 500 of these before starting on the heavy crossbow model. When I finally got home, I found all 4 of my women huddled around the table whispering. The moment they saw me, they all looked guilty. Lu Yan's face was bright red. I didn't need to guess what they'd been discussing. Lu Yan had obviously told them every detail about our trip, including the bedroom arrangements. They were amazed she'd survived handling me alone for so many days. They knew my stamina all too well. Mu Wanqing and her sister each grabbed one of my arms and started fussing. The bath was ready. I must be exhausted from the trip, and so on. Then Wanqing dropped the bomb with an innocent smile. She announced that Wu Xianyue had never helped me bathe before, so tonight should be her turn. Xianyue's jaw dropped. They'd clearly plotted this beforehand, and Wanqing had just thrown her to the wolves. Some sisterhood. Before Xianyue could protest, Wanqing was already ordering everyone around. Lu Yan to help pour the hot water, Wanqing to prepare fresh clothes, everything organized in seconds. That girl ran my household like a general runs an army. I sank into the huge wooden bathtub I'd built myself. The warm water wrapped around my body, and every muscle finally relaxed. I'd been in this ancient world for quite a while now. The food was still too plain for my taste, but everything else, especially the women, I had no complaints about. I was content with my life, wives who loved me, a growing territory, and the satisfaction of building everything from scratch. But I knew I was still small. Compared to the powerful ministers at court, I was nothing. The barbarians still lurked beyond the border. Other nations surrounded the empire. War could come anytime. After a few days of inspecting the village and directing construction, the weather seemed to turn. The snow started melting and the sun grew warmer. Then a brutal cold snap hit, a false spring that was worse than midwinter. My house was fine. I'd built heated brick beds that kept the rooms warm. But everyone else suffered badly. The worst hit were the new families who'd just arrived from Yuzhou City. Many were still living in temporary grass shelters without proper walls or insulation. Adults could tough it out, but the elderly and children couldn't. I organized round-the-clock charcoal distribution from the brick kilns and carpentry furnaces, but it wasn't enough. People huddled under thin blankets, and their body heat just wouldn't rise. I gave them work assignments, weaving rope and baskets, to keep them moving and earning a bowl of grain rice daily. That helped more than the charcoal. The real crisis was medical. Hundreds of people across both villages, the tribal settlement, and even the mine workers came down with wind-cold illness. My father-in-law's clinic was overwhelmed. Every room was packed with patients. He'd set up 34 medicine brewing stations, 24 inside, 10 more outside in the yard. He recruited village boys as assistants and started teaching them basic medicine. Mu Wanqing and Lu Yan went to help too. Then came the news I'd been dreading. My father-in-law looked up at me with exhaustion etched into his graying temples. 3 days. That's all the medicine I have left. Yesterday a child had died. He blamed himself, but I told him he'd done everything possible. In these conditions, anywhere else, these people wouldn't even have a chance. The situation was clear. The drugstores in Yuzhou City were nearly empty too. The Taiha Medicine Bureau had monopolized the entire province's herb supply. Buying from them at their inflated prices was out of the question, which left only one option: robbery. The Taiha Bureau shipped large quantities of diverse herbs to the capital on a regular schedule. That was the target, their main supply convoy heading to the capital. The smaller collection routes were unreliable, with limited quantities and unpredictable schedules. This wasn't the herb growing season, so the only meaningful supply was already harvested and in transit. I'd anticipated this scenario months ago and had Wang Dinglu's scouts tracking their movements. The question was which route they'd take. Yuzhou had 2 main roads, one through Wanhuang County turning through Yinzhou to the capital, and another going through Qingzhou where they could use either land or water transport. One way or another, those herbs were coming to my village. The Taiha Bureau could add this to the list of reasons to hate me. I didn't care. My people were dying. I figured the Taiha Bureau's main transport route ran through Qingzhou province, which meant their convoys had to pass through Desangguan, the Great Scatter Pass. That was where I'd intercept them. I told Wang Dinglu the plan. He groaned. Not again. Every time it's me playing bandit. He had a point. I'd made him do this several times now. But this was life and death for the whole settlement. He worried that making his trained scouts dress up as bandits again might stir up old habits. After all, robbing people was more exciting than honest soldiering. I told him to take 200 of our village soldiers, the ones who'd been with us longest and could keep secrets. Bring Lin Xiaoxi and Chunbai along. Leave by afternoon. But first I needed intelligence about Desanguine. I went to the Linghu brothers at the training field, where they were drilling hundreds of soldiers with weighted wooden poles. Linghu Chongshan told me what I needed to know. Desanguine was the gateway to Qingzhou province, garrisoned by 30,000 elite soldiers under a third-rank general named Qianmu. Including militia farmers inside the pass, total strength was over 50,000. The fortress was bigger than Tianyong City. The Qian family had an interesting history. They were originally Wei kingdom generals who switched sides during the war that destroyed Wei 100 years ago. Their betrayal opened Desanguine for the invading army, and they were rewarded with hereditary command of the pass. The current Qianmu was the third generation. At their peak, the Qian family controlled key positions across both Yuzhou and Qingzhou provinces. That's exactly why the emperor had built up the Linghu family in Tianyong City as a counterweight. This was classic imperial balancing. Every emperor plays factions against each other. The Qian family were former traders who'd been allowed to grow powerful.